The story begins in an arena, where a man steps into an academy's entrance qualification exam. In doing so, he immediately shocks the world's strongest sword goddess because the moment the match begins, he is already standing behind the examiner. In the next instant, Gray swings his blade and defeats the academy's examiner in a single strike. That scene awakens something the sword goddess has never felt before, the desire to take a disciple. She also senses that Gray carries a mysterious power hidden deep within his body. What no one knows is that in his previous life, Gray had already reached the absolute pinnacle of swordsmanship by his own strength alone. He once wounded humanity's greatest enemy. Even so, Gray still underestimated the true power of the Purger. In the end, his heart was pierced by a single, devastating blow. Gray believed that was where his life would end. Yet in the very next moment, he finds himself within a mysterious space. There he encounters a being who calls himself Kronos, the god of time. Kronos tells Gray that the power within him surpasses even that of the Purger. It simply has never been awakened. For that reason, the god of time grants Gray a second chance, allowing him to be reborn. With his memories and an empowered soul, everything returns to the beginning, and the fate of the world is placed upon Gray's shoulders. When Gray opens his eyes again, he finds himself lying in a field of grass. Not far away stands his hometown. The village of Ronaldo. Shock floods Gray's mind as he truly returned to the past. At that moment, pain surges through his arm. Looking down at the wound, Gray recognizes it as a scar, left behind when Beard used to bully him. He silently swears that he will never lose to people like that again, because 10 years from now, the Purge will descend upon this world once more. And when that day comes, no one in the world will be able to stand against it. Still, the god of time once told Gray that his true power far surpasses theirs. It has simply yet to awaken. As Gray prepares to return to the village and think through his next move, he runs into Bearded, the one who has bullied him for years. They had searched everywhere for Gray, never expecting to find him here in the forest. Bearded suddenly hurls a sword in Gray's direction. He demands that Gray fight him in a mock battle today, or else he won't be allowed to leave. Gray ignores the provocation, coldly replying that his injuries haven't fully healed, and that they can fight once he's recovered. Beard tells Gray not to worry. The weapons they're using are shield swords, perfectly safe the moment he finishes speaking. Beard lunges straight toward Gray. He swings his sword fast, but Gray dodges it with ease. After countless battles in his past life, Beard's attacks look painfully slow. To Gray, the sight leaves everyone watching in shock. Since when did this guy become so fast? Gray retreats, swiftly creating distance, as he picks up a sword from the ground. If Beard is that eager to get beaten, Gray has no problem teaching him a lesson. The instant Gray grips the sword, Beard charges again. Gray counters in one smooth motion, knocking Beard's weapon clean out of his hand. Beard freezes in disbelief, convincing himself that the last exchange was nothing but luck. Then Gray smiles, excitement flashing in his eyes, and calmly tells him not to be afraid. Shield swords are safe with that. Gray slashes straight into Beard. Even with a shield sword, a bloody gash opens across Beard's shoulder. The shock sends Beard crashing to his knees, hands clamped over the wound as blood pours out. Everything unfolds exactly as Gray expected. Before Beard can recover, Gray smacks the flat of the blade straight into his mouth. The impact knocks several of Beard's teeth flying. Trembling in terror, Beard stammers, asking how Gray became this strong. Panicking, Beard shouts for his companions to attack Gray together. In barely 2 seconds, they agree on a plan. This guy got strong out of nowhere. Hit him from behind moments later. Gray finds himself completely surrounded. Gray lets out a short laugh and asks if they want to end up like Bearded. They don't answer. Instead, they rush him all at once. Gray sneers he was planning to let them go, but they clearly wasted their chance. 10 minutes later, every one of them is pinned to the ground. The people Gray once feared are now effortlessly defeated. If Gray remembers correctly, they belong to the Salya Sword Dojo, and he's right thinking themselves strong enough. They've recently stopped training there. The thought almost makes Gray scoff. With strength like this, they really believe they're powerful. Still, the dojo won't help him improve. But there's one thing Gray knows for sure. He'll need that dojo's help later on. Gray has never been to the dojo before, but he remembers that entry usually requires a recommendation. Beard tells Gray to ask someone else, explaining that if his master finds out about the loss, he'll definitely be punished. Gray answers by casually swinging his sword, warning Beard to stop talking and do exactly as he's told. The blade flashes, slicing a leaf cleanly in half, right in front of Beard's eyes. In the next instant, Beard bolts forward, hurriedly offering to introduce the dojo. It's this way he'll take Gray there right now. Along the way, Beard can't help but ask why Gray even wants to go. With strength like his, there's no real need to train there anymore. Gray explains that the dojo holds a recommendation slot for the academy that alone makes the trip worthwhile. Another person nearby mutters that even for the academy, someone as strong as Gray doesn't really need to go. Hearing that, Gray drifts into memory. If this were truly enough, he wouldn't bother either, but it's nowhere near sufficient. Even the strongest lineup in the world couldn't withstand a single strike from a purger. Back then, even after unleashing that mysterious power, once the purger grew serious, Gray couldn't harm him at all. He doesn't know how powerful he must become to truly defeat the purger. Still in that moment, even if only briefly, Gray did control that dark power, the very reason he once became the strongest sword god. For a short time, even then, his true focus remained the sword techniques passed down by the sword saint. If he could train multiple sword paths under equal conditions, the same way he honed his swordsmanship, then his strength might truly change. After all, becoming a sword god through dark power was fleeting. His own foundation was still too weak. That's why Gray believes this is the real reason Kronos, the god of time, sent him here. Not long after Gray finally arrives at the dojo, the one in charge formally apologizes for her disciples' actions. She explains that those students have already been expelled. She will not tolerate such behavior from her own people. Greg gets straight to the point. He's heard that this place can issue academy recommendations, and he's here to ask for one. Hearing that, the woman slowly draws her sword. She does want to write the recommendation, but before she does, she needs to confirm Gray's strength. She tells him to make the first move. Once he's ready, he can attack at any time. Gray doesn't hesitate the instant her words fall. He closes the distance, and within 3 seconds, they've already exchanged over a dozen blows. The dojo master lets out a quiet sound of surprise. Something about this young man feels off in her eyes. For someone Gray's age, to wield such practical swordsmanship, it's as if he survived countless real battles. That alone explains why Beard lost. None of them ever stood a chance against him. Beyond that, she notices Gray's style is largely self-taught, yet certain movements resemble academy techniques. Had someone trained him before? In the end, the dojo master reaches a conclusion. Gray's swordsmanship may be rough, but his talent is undeniable. A smile forms on her lips. He's an uncut gem, one she can polish herself. A moment later, she decides the test has gone on long enough. Regrettable as it may be, it's time to end it. What she doesn't realize is that Gray has already seen through her intentions, and he's been waiting for her counterattack. In the next instant, Gray gathers his strength and knocks, her sword flying from her hand. Genuine shock flashing across her face. After that, no matter how many strikes she launches, Gray blocks them all with ease. Confusion grows in the dojo master's mind. Why isn't Gray retreating at all? And how is he keeping up with her pace? What started as a simple test now forces her to go all out. And for the first time, a hint of fear creeps in her heart, something she never expected to feel. At the same time, Gray raises his sword, a mysterious power faintly swirling around his body. Without realizing it, he's begun to awaken that strength. The moment the dojo master lunges toward him, Gray swings, and a streak of dark energy seems to cut through the air. She doesn't dare to take the blow head on. Instead, she retreats instantly, a deep sense of danger screaming in her instincts. Meanwhile, Gray unknowingly releases that power, leaving his body dangerously weakened. Seizing the opening, the dojo master strikes, intending to end the duel. Her earlier sense of danger was real. She simply hadn't felt it without taking the attack directly. But as her blade comes down, shock overtakes her expression. Her sword has already snapped in two, and the most terrifying part is that she never even saw it happen. Only then does Gray realize that his earlier strike had already snapped the dojo master's wooden sword in half. If she had charged in at that moment, it wouldn't have been a blade that broke, would have been her head at the same time. Gray is just as shaken. He's used that mysterious power from his past life. Once again, the very next instant, his mind goes completely blank. His legs give out, and he drops to his knees, right in front of the dojo master. That alone makes one thing painfully clear. His current body simply can't control that power. Gray struggles back to his feet, insisting that he's fine for a moment. He considers telling the woman about that power. After all, in his eyes, the dojo master is undeniably strong, but he quickly abandons the idea. Even if he explained it, she likely wouldn't believe him, and he can't even control it himself. Letting out a short laugh, Gray brushes it off, claiming he just got a little carried away. The dojo master stares at the broken sword in her hand, her expression grave by all logic. This should be impossible. Her wooden blade was severed by a shield sword, and she knows Gray is fully aware of it. Sensing her intense gaze, Gray immediately plays dumb. asking if she's reading too much into it. The dojo master slowly closes her eyes, since he doesn't want to talk. She has no intention of forcing the issue. Turning back to him, she confirms that what Gray wants is an academy recommendation. Gray answers honestly, asking her to write one for him. She tells him she can indeed recommend him to the kingdom's most prestigious institution, the Royal Sword Academy, but she won't do that. Her reason is simple: Gray doesn't belong there. The words leave Gray deflated. Yet he knows she's right with his current strength. He still falls short in her eyes. Right now he lacks power, especially the refinement and depth of true swordsmanship. What he doesn't expect is her sudden shift in tone. She tells him not to misunderstand. Where he truly belongs is the World Union Academy. The name alone leaves Gray visibly stunned. It isn't the top academy of a single kingdom, but the finest academy in the entire world. Countless elites have graduated from there, and even the Sword Saints once walked its halls. Gray asked her in disbelief how someone at his current level could possibly be accepted. The dojo master, of course, already understands that concern. She tells him bluntly that he's likely realized it himself. His body is nowhere near the standard required of a true swordsman at the Royal Sword Academy. Skill alone might let him scrape by, but at the World Union Academy, that simply won't work. Even she can't fully grasp how Gray managed to wield such techniques. With a body this fragile, Gray lets out a quiet sigh. Everyone at that academy is a monster. With his current physique, he barely even qualifies to compete. The dojo master tells him not to lose heart. There are still 9 months before the exam. The time is tight, but not hopeless. Hearing that, Gray's heart starts racing. Could it be that she plans to train him herself? Just as he expects, the dojo master warns him to prepare for suffering. What comes next will be nothing short of a true, hellish training regime. Gray doesn't know how brutal that training will be, but that's exactly what he's hoping for. He bows respectfully, asking his master to guide him. No matter the outcome, he'll give everything he has to learn her sword. From that day on, Gray follows her training plan to the letter, pushing himself through relentless daily practice. Beyond training, he's forced to consume massive amounts of food, with his master ensuring he gets plenty of meat. He's even made to swallow bitter medicinal herbs that leave his mouth numb, all to harden his body still. Swordsmanship remains the core of it all, taking up the vast majority of his time. In the blink of an eye, 8 months pass, and Gray's physical condition improves dramatically. Even the dojo master admits there's little left she can teach him. What remains is for him to set out confidently for the World Union Academy. Though a month remains before the exam, she believes Gray shouldn't take it in an unfamiliar place. It's better to arrive early and acclimate. Before he leaves, she prepares ample travel funds for him. Gray accepts the money and swears he won't betray her trust. With that, Gray sets off to register at the World Union Academy. His master smiles faintly and tells him she'll be praying for his success and that he must write to her once it's over. After more than 20 days on the road, Gray finally arrives at the World Union Academy. It's the first time he's ever seen a place this grand and luxurious, and soon after, the Academy begins distributing entrance passes. For the exam, the World Union Academy's exam grounds are packed with countless candidates, yet only around 20 are expected to pass. Still, rumors say the number of successful applicants changes wildly each year, sometimes 50, sometimes only 1, and other years even hundreds. There's never a fixed quota. Before long, a red-haired woman steps forward to face the crowd. She gets straight to the point, announcing the distribution of exam entry passes and instructing everyone to take the papers in front of them. In the next moment, she snaps her fingers. As the sound echoes, a surge of golden light washes over everyone present. Instantly, a sheet of paper appears in each candidate's hand. Gray looks down at his candidate. No fencing course. The red-haired woman's voice rings out from the platform, explaining that some may be surprised to find nothing written on the paper beyond their number and assigned course. She assures them this is how it works every year. The World Union Academy does not discriminate based on age, gender, nationality, background, or status. In this place, even names are meaningless. Only those who pass the exam and earn the right to cross the bridge will be asked for one if they wish. Successful candidates may even use a false name. The rule leaves Gray genuinely surprised. He never stated he wanted to take a sword-related course, yet the Academy already decided for him. The red-haired woman explains that courses are assigned based on appearance alone. If anyone was placed incorrectly, they should raise their hand. She'd personally kneel and apologize. The claim sounds far too absurd. No one believes it. Most assume the Academy investigated them well before the exam. Some even suspect she used some form of mind reading. Magic either way. No one believes appearance alone. Determine their course after a brief pause. With no hands raised, a red-haired woman announces the official start of the exam. At the same moment, numbers appear on Gray's exam sheet. His fencing test is scheduled for AM on the first day. Gray curses under his breath. He never expected to be scheduled on the very first day. He'd hoped for more time to rest and let his arm recover. The red-haired woman calmly adds that this is a one-time practical exam. Anyone who arrives late will be disqualified immediately. Punctuality is mandatory. The Academy does not accept individual requests to adjust exam times. Gray instinctively touches his injured arm. If only he'd had a few more days to heal. On his way here, he'd run into an ogre and even an ogre general. In that moment of crisis, he'd use the mysterious power once again. With a single strike, he cut down the ogre general. Afterward, he needed a long period of rest. That was why he only arrived near the final stage of the Academy's exams. His arm had been severely injured in that battle. It seems he has no choice but to take the exam. While wounded before long, a staff member notifies Gray that it's time to enter the arena. He takes a deep breath, forcing himself not to dwell on the worst-case scenario. His left arm is fine, and his right can still move to some extent. This exam isn't impossible. The key is to find the examiner's opening. The instant the match begins, and end it fast at the same time. Another candidate is fighting the examiner. In the arena ahead, the examiner suddenly crouches low and swings his sword, sending the burly man flying in a single blow. The defeated candidate retrieves his weapon and leaves the field. A faint smile forms at the corner of Gray's lips. Even so, he knows the truth. With his current injury, defeating that examiner quickly will be extremely difficult. After dispatching the previous candidate, the examiner turns toward Gray and calls out, telling him it's his turn. No dawdling, Gray steps onto the arena. Lacking confidence, his right arm is still badly injured. The examiner stands with his hands behind his back and tells Gray to make the first move, assuring him that going all out is fine. Hearing that, Gray tightens his grip on the sword. Whether invited or not, he was going all in. This is his only chance in the next instant. Gray launches himself forward. At the same time, Gray recalls his master's teaching. Swinging a sword isn't about arm strength alone. It's about generating power from the entire body and transmitting it through the arm. Now he decides to put that lesson into practice. Even if his right arm can't exert much force, as long as he can channel power through the rest of his body, he can still strike in the blink of an eye. Gray closes in on the examiner and swings his sword. He follows his master's method precisely, yet he still can't fight the way he normally does. The injury to his arm is clearly holding him back. If fighting without arm strength were that easy, no one would bother training their body in the first place. Meanwhile, the examiner catches a glimpse of Gray's opening and prepares to counter, but Gray has no intention of letting it happen so easily. That's when he suddenly senses something off. Why does the examiner's sword feel slow? It can't be that the examiner is weak. Otherwise, he wouldn't be standing here, which means there's only one explanation. Gray has gotten faster with a sharp whoosh. The examiner's blade swings in, only to be blocked effortlessly by Gray. Gray quickly compares the examiner to his master. The man has overwhelming strength, but in terms of speed and technique, he's nowhere near her. If Gray relies on the swordsmanship he learned from his master, he might be able to make up for his lack of arm strength over the next several seconds. The two clash repeatedly, the sound of steel ringing through the air. Little by little, Gray realizes he's starting to outpace the examiner. Panic flashes across the examiner's face, his expression tightening, seeing that a spark of excitement rises in Gray's chest. This opponent isn't as invincible as he imagined. He still has a chance, just as his master once said. She was certain Gray would pass this exam. With a sharp clang, their swords collide once more. This time, Gray has the upper hand. A flick of his wrist sends the examiner's weapon flying. His eyes harden, even with his right arm injured. Gray is certain this fight is his to win. At this point, Gray is completely confident, even with his right arm barely usable. He knows he can defeat the examiner. Still, the examiner is fast. He snaps his sword back and launches a rapid chain of more than a dozen counterattacks. Unfortunately for him, every strike is perfectly clear in Gray's eyes. Time after time, Gray evades with ease. The examiner's swordsmanship has been fully read. In the next instant, Gray gathers strength into his left arm. with no flashy movements. He thrusts straight at the examiner's body. The attack is blocked. That tells Gray something important. The gap in raw power still exists. Winning with only one arm won't be that simple. Even so, he notices the examiner's movements growing rougher. It's risky, but this might be his opening. Gray deliberately exposes a flaw, and just as expected, the examiner takes the bait. His heart pounds. He must withstand the next attack head-on. There could be no mistake. Without hesitation, the examiner swings. In his mind, this strike should end the match. Gray almost laughs finally. You're opening a wide, committed strike like that is the perfect chance to counter. His body dips low as he channels all his strength into his legs. With a powerful push, Gray vanishes from where he stood. In the very next moment, he appears behind the examiner. There's no better time to strike, no matter the difference in power. Once he's behind him, it's over. Shock floods the examiner's eyes. He never imagined Gray could move this fast. Gray gives him no time to react. It's time to end this exam. Just as Gray is about to thrust his sword, a shout of stop echoes through the arena. He halts instantly, freezing his blade mere inches from the examiner's back. Confused, Gray looks up toward the stance. Was he about to be declared the winner? But he hadn't actually defeated the examiner yet. Moments later, an announcement comes from above. The exam time has expired, and the result of the match is a draw. The verdict hits Gray like a blow. He'd been so focused on the fight that he completely forgot. The practical exam was limited to 3 minutes. Regret surges through him. It feels like he's failed his master's expectations. Frustration reaches its peak as he clenches and unclenches his sword again and again. Then, without another word, Gray turns and leaves the arena. He did everything he could. If not for his injured arm, the fight would have ended long ago. If he couldn't even defeat the examiner, the path ahead would only grow harder. Near the exit, Gray pauses and slowly turns back. His arm should heal by next year. That means he'll have to take the exam again. Time passes quickly, and a full week goes by in the blink of an eye. Inside the academy, 6 figures sit around a massive round table. Engaged in discussion, an elderly man, clearly holding the most authority, speaks first, asking for everyone's thoughts on the candidates and whether they should offer any evaluations. 2 instructors complain about how exhausted they are, while another argues that this kind of group observation is inefficient and should be changed next year. Immediately, someone else pushes back, insisting they can't prioritize convenience over the risk of overlooking a true genius. The old man raises a hand, irritation creeping into his voice. He reminds them that he asked for opinions on the students, not the exam system. In the next instant, recordings of every candidate from the exam appear in midair before them. The evaluators use the recordings to judge standout performances, then weigh each candidate's aptitude and overall strength before deciding who to admit. The footage currently under review belongs to the fencing course. Aside from those who outright defeated the examiner, candidates and are considered the most impressive, one instructor comments that adding more students would only slow the course down. Better to finalize the list here. The room falls silent. The elderly man continues watching the footage, offering no response after a moment. He speaks so. The qualified candidates for the fencing course are essentially decided any further input. At that moment, someone speaks up. Did none of you notice candidate? The old man pauses, eyes narrowing slightly. Candidate, is there something special about him? The one who spoke is Professor Ariel. She looks around the table and presses the point. Answer me, what do you actually think of candidate? One by one, the instructors shift their attention to the footage. Labeled a tutor scoffs. That kid's strength seems pretty average. And he's left-handed. I watched that match too. Yes, it looked like he was about to win, but if he needs traps and setups just to beat an examiner, his future prospects are questionable. Another adds that while his technique is solid, his lack of raw power leaves him suppressed for most of the fight. After reviewing the full battle, they reach a unanimous conclusion. The boy doesn't belong at the World Union Academy. The footage is dismissed, several instructors shaking their heads in disapproval. Ariel looks as though she wants to argue. Her lips part, then close again. Inside, she's practically laughing. So many eyes, yet not a single one truly saw it. If this is how blind they are, then collective evaluation really is a waste. This gem is hers by the next day. Everyone gathers once more at the Academy's central plaza. Gray's candidate number is. If the paper in his hand ignites, it means he's been accepted. Soon a powerful announcement echoes across the plaza. The list of successful candidates for the fencing course will now be announced. 6 candidates have passed. Gray's heart tightens. This is it. Not long after 2 exam papers burst into flame. Candidate and candidate then come and follow by. And these 6 candidates have officially been admitted to the fencing course. Gray freezes. His paper remains unchanged. That alone tells him everything. He failed. The broadcast continues. All successful candidates must cross the bridge and complete registration before the end of today. The laughter breaks out among those accepted, standing in sharp contrast to gray silence. His heart sinks. It seems he's let his master down after all. What comes next? Should he settle for the Royal Academy instead? Just as Gray and the other rejected candidates sink into despair, the next announcement cuts through the air. Next, God's Eye. Special admission in the very next moment. Gray's exam paper flares with a cold blue glow. Candidate confirmed admitted. Shock floods his face. It isn't just him. Everyone present is stunned. A God's Eye admission has actually appeared this year. The realization hits Gray again and again. Does this mean he truly passed? Someone scoffs nearby another God's Eye pick. Haven't seen one of those in a while. Gray has no idea what God's Eye really represents. This is the first time he's even heard the term. Yet the looks aimed at him are filled with disdain. Isn't that just a backdoor admission? Looks like the World Union Academy has fallen. The words catch Gray off guard. He never imagined God's isolation would be seen as favoritism. Almost instinctively, his thoughts turn to his master. He has no connections of his own, so if anyone made this possible, her influence must run far deeper than he ever realized. Just as the two students who had mocked Gray continued whispering, an elderly man cut them off sharply. You too, watch how you talk about God's Eye. Special admission, his gaze turned cold. God's Eye is an honor category that has produced countless heroes over the past century. You kids don't understand anything. The two only laughed. Of course, the old generation favors God's Eye. That was their era, one of them shrugged. We know exactly what God's Eye is. The recent ones, Amy White, Bella Olbrecht, Rick Mueller, and Jacob Brinfield, they were all God's Eye admits. He sneered, and every single one of them failed. Even we current candidates know it. God's Eye's become a joke, just a backdoor label. But those words hit Gray like a hammer, because he knew the truth. Amy White had once reached the realm of the sword god. In his previous life, Bella Albright stood at the very peak of magical power, and Rick Muller and Jacob Brinfield were core fighters in the campaign against the cleansers. Grace swallowed hard, which meant from this moment on, his name had been placed alongside theirs. The broadcast sounded again. The entrance ceremony will begin in 30 minutes. Students who have changed into uniform, please assemble at the plaza, in front of the main building. By now, Gray had already changed. Just like the others, they waited. But no one came for a moment. They wondered if they were in the wrong place. Soon a professor rushed over, apologizing profusely. There had been an issue with the setup. Causing the delay, he asked the students to step back so he could cast the spell here. Everyone retreated 10 meters, revealing golden magical patterns forming on the ground. Confusion spread through the crowd. The professor slowly placed his hand against the earth. In an instant, golden mana surged outward like a tide. A massive, golden magic circle lit up across the entire plaza. Then a golden staircase rose from the ground, linking directly to the interior of the building. Gasps filled the air, such dense, controlled magic. Was this the true level of a world Union Academy instructor in the blink of an eye? A second golden staircase manifested beside the building, drawing off from every new student. The magic instructor chuckled. You may step onto the stairs and take any seat you like. The crowd was still buzzing about the massive teleportation array from moments ago. Gray didn't bother choosing a spot. He took the first empty seat he saw. It seemed the academy wanted to hold this ceremony somewhere, with a full view of the campus. Using high-tier teleportation magic just for that felt absurdly extravagant. Still, no matter how you looked at it, Gray had officially entered the World Union Academy. Thinking back on the instructors he'd seen over the past 2 days, he couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of awe. At the academy's depth, someone in front of them muttered, "Aren't there way too many seats? If they're only admitting 30 students, this feels excessive." Another person laughed. You seriously don't know. The student being questioned didn't look embarrassed at all. He scratched his head aside from sword training. He barely paid attention to anything else. A girl snapped her fingers. "Then let me explain. The World Union Academy lives up to its name," she said lightly. "Top students from all over the world are being evaluated. It's not just us." She pointed upward. "Look, aren't they already here?" The sword-focused student's eyes widened. In the sky, multiple airships were approaching, accompanied by massive flying beasts. He jumped his feet. That's insane. Gray looked up as well and noticed the smaller vessel suspended beneath one of the airships. His expression stiffened. The Strato airship. He had boarded it before, back when he was part of a cleansing suppression unit, one of the largest airships in the world, and they brought it out just for an entrance ceremony. Then again, that kind of excess suited the World Union Academy perfectly. As the airships landed, students from all corners of the world streamed into the venue at that moment. A large, aged hand pressed down on the podium. It seems everyone has arrived. A deep voice declared then, "Let the entrance ceremony of the World Union Academy begin." What followed was a speech that dragged on for half an hour. Gray nearly nodded off, realizing that even here, an entrance ceremony was still an entrance ceremony. At that moment, a student beside Gray stood up and announced next. The chief students of each department will give their addresses first. Swordsmanship Division's top student, Leon Hart Appius, as the figure stepped onto the stage. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Is that him? The one who defeated an examiner in an instant. During the entrance exam, rumors even claimed that his swordsmanship rivaled that of full professors. Leon Hart Appius, a name synonymous with pure talent. Gray studied him with interest. The guy was undeniably impressive. Strangely though, Gray couldn't recall Leon Hart ever achieving anything truly decisive. In his previous life, Leon Hart first offered a polite nod to the faculty, then asked calmly, "May I speak freely?" After a brief exchange of looks, the instructors nodded with permission granted. Leon Hart began his opening line, silenced the entire venue. "I have a formal complaint to raise with the Academy." Then, shifting tone, he added, "But before that, I'd like to greet all students who are admitted through standard procedures. It's an honor to be accepted alongside you. Let us strive together so that when we graduate, we may become people who truly contribute to this world." The response was lukewarm. The speech was painfully generic. No one cared the complaint, however. Had everyone listening, Leon Hart didn't mind. "I look forward to the day we stand tall, advancing side by side as students of the World Union Academy." And his gaze sharpened, locking on to the back of the hall. "But unfortunately, among us, there is someone who doesn't belong here." "Isn't that right?" he said coldly. "Professor Ariel, the one in charge of God's eye missions." Ariel clearly hadn't expected the spotlight to swing her way. Internally, she scoffed. What an arrogant child. Outwardly, she smiled gently. Every student here passed the Academy's rigorous evaluations. They may not match your strength, but excluding them would be unwise. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "So tell me, are you suggesting that God's eye selection is unfair?" What Leon had been waiting for was Professor Ariel's question. "I'm not talking about the students admitted through the regular exams." What Leon meant was, the student Professor Ariel had brought in, through the back door, the God's eye special admission. Hearing Leon's words, Professor Ariel didn't get angry. She laughed instead. This kid really wasn't afraid. And it was hard to tell whether it was arrogance or confidence. Leon waved his hand and said angrily, "That special admit, step forward. Return your uniform and leave the Academy, because you don't deserve to stand here." But no one stepped forward. Aside from the 30 admitted students on this side, the other hundreds of students had never seen Gray, and they wanted to see what the special admit Leon was talking about looked like. Gray naturally wasn't going to stand up in front of so many people. But where was Leon's hostility coming from? Luckily, Leon didn't know what Gray looked like. It was a close call, and maybe Gray wouldn't get dragged in if he didn't step forward. Adil Lauged, looks like this year's freshmen are quite energetic. Leon grew irritated. "Professor, I'm serious. Stop admitting students through the back door." In the next moment, Ariel appeared behind Leon and said lightly, "Do you really think you're stronger than the child I chose?" The entire crowd was stunned. Leon was the Sword Division's chief student, and Professor Ariel was saying, "You might be inferior to that special admit." Even Leon looked shocked. "Professor, that joke is going too far. How could I be weaker than that special admit?" Proud by nature, Leon felt openly insulted. He stared straight into Ariel's eyes. "Of course I'm stronger than him. Do you think I'm wrong?" Ariel didn't get angry. Instead, she seemed to like Leon's attitude. "Then how about we make a bet now?" Leon looked confused. "What's there to bet? Just have it come up and duel me." Hearing that, Ariel's expression shifted. "The stake is my job and that child admission." The moment she said it, both Gray and Leon froze in shock, and Gray could only think, this Professor Ariel is truly bold. Gray couldn't help thinking that Ariel was being far too reckless. With his arm injured, there was no way he could defeat Leon, and Ariel noticed that Leon voiced his concern. "Are you planning to make me fight that special admit?" One-on-one, Ariel shook her head. "I would never do something so crude. If you went all out, you could lose your life. As an educator, I can't risk a student's safety." The veins at the corner of Leon's mouth twitched. Ariel's words had clearly struck a nerve. He snapped back angrily, "Professor, are you provoking me? If that's the case, I'll accept the challenge, even if it kills me." But Ariel remained calm. "That's why we'll use monsters as the wager. It's much safer that way." She also knew full well that Leon excelled at dealing with monsters. Leon's expression tightened. "You're certainly well informed. So what exactly is the bet?" Ariel's request was simple All you need to do is kill the monster I designate. The match would be divided into several rounds, with each round featuring a stronger monster than the last. Whoever failed to defeat their assigned target first would lose if Leon lost. Ariel would resign as a professor, and every special admit would be expelled. Gray allowed a long sigh with a hassle. He only wanted to train in peace. If Leon lost, everything would proceed exactly as Ariel had declared. Ariel stepped up to Leon with a provocative smile. So do you dare accept? Leon was confident in his strength, but he needed to know what kind of monster he'd be facing. One of Leon's greatest strengths was that he never relied on blind confidence. Even when he believed he could handle any opponent, he refused to walk into an unknown trap. Hearing that, Ariel nodded and pretended to think for a moment. Then let's start with an ogre general. If that sounds too easy, I can always arrange something more challenging. The entire hall erupted. An ogre general was far beyond what students like them could possibly handle. Meanwhile, Gray felt a growing sense of unease. Why an ogre general? Was there really some hidden scheme? Just as Leon suspected, Leon slammed his fist onto the table. Professor Ariel, I respect you, but this has to be a joke. He growled. An ogre general isn't something a single person can kill on their own, Ariel clarified. Of course, he won't be sent to kill an ogre general right away. I'll set the time frame to a full year. That should be reasonable. Leon still objected. If someone could train for just 1 year and defeat a disaster-level monster alone, people wouldn't be suffering anymore. Pick a more realistic target. No one could do that. Hearing this, Gray's mouth fell slightly open. A faint smile followed. Gray finally understood what Ariel was getting at. Meanwhile, Leon, still unaware he'd walked into a trap, pressed on. You chose an unbeatable monster on purpose. So this ends without a clear winner. I won't agree to that. Ariel took a few calm steps forward. Then let's add another condition. If it's a draw, you win. Leon froze. In other words, if the special admit failed to defeat the ogre general, Ariel would be automatically dismissed, and all special admits would be expelled. Ariel looked at Leon with interest. How does that sound? Leon thought. Ariel had to be insane to him. The outcome of this wager was already decided. Ariel laughed and turned away. I'm guessing you have no further objections. If that's the case, it's settled. Leon still wasn't satisfied. Just to be clear, it can't be a weakened ogre general or anything like that, right? Of course, Ariel said, flicking her fingers through the air. Violet mana gathered around her ring as she formed a magic contract. A cool pen wrote in my dear, outlining the terms. Soon the completed contract was placed before Leon. Every detail was written into the magical pact. If he had no issues, he could sign immediately. Leon reviewed the contract carefully and found no problems. He grabbed the pen and signed his name, agreeing to the match. Confident of victory, Leon still asked, do you really think that kid can win? Ariel answered that she didn't know. It depended on how hard he trained. With everything done, Ariel calmly took her seat. Most of the other instructors thought Ariel had completely lost her mind. Seated in the back, Gray let out a long breath. He found the whole discussion painfully dull. Still, when Ariel set the time frame to a full year, Gray sensed something was off. Could it be that the one he defeated before enrollment was being counted as well? At that moment, Ariel's gaze met Gray's. Gray's heart skipped from that look alone. He knew his guess was probably right. The wager had been decided from the very beginning. Ariel gave Gray a subtle, shushing gesture. His eyes filled with amusement. Not long after, Gray attended his very first magic class. Standing at the podium, the magic instructor spoke calmly. Some of you may be surprised that we're starting lessons on the first day, but as academy students, you must remember no day can be wasted. He then began, explaining the most fundamental aspect of magic, how to use it. Within our bodies lies an invisible energy, known as ether. By controlling our internal magic circuits, we were able to cast spells. Gray was seated in the very back row. He had worried about falling behind, but for now he could keep up. He had already heard nearly the same explanation. Back at the training camp, Gray lowered his gaze slightly. Another problem weighing on his mind. He had been placed in the same class as that unbearably arrogant guy. With a wry smile, Gray thought to himself, I don't have time to play along with you. People just don't figure out that I'm a god's. I special admit, unfortunately. The professor noticed his expression. The student on the far right. You look rather bored, it turned out. The magic instructor had been watching Gray all along. Class hasn't even been going for 5 minutes, and you're already looking around. You got some nerve. Gray hadn't expected to be seen through so easily, especially from the back row. He hurriedly apologized in the next moment. The magic instructor closed his book. If you're that confident, why don't you show the entire class? He had assumed Gray would demonstrate a basic spell. But before the instructor could continue, Gray cut in with all due respect. Professor, this is a swordsmanship class. I thought it wouldn't be a problem, even if I couldn't use magic. The instructor let out a cold laugh. Even if you only fight with a sword, you still need to understand basic magic. To coordinate with mages at the very least, you must learn the fundamentals and get a feel for using them. Gray's heart skipped even. The explanation was identical to what he'd heard at the training camp. If that was the case, would the spell be the same as well? He spoke up before the instructor could continue. Are we supposed to learn Ether Bullet? The magic instructor froze for a split second. You know that spell then. Can you actually use Ether Bullet? Gray felt a surge of relief. At least, that hellish training camp hadn't been for nothing. Seeing an opportunity, the instructor proposed a spar. Leon, you can use Ether Bullet too, right? Leon slowly rose from his seat. Yes, Professor. I've trained with Ether Bullet as well. He added that said, my training hasn't been limited to swordsmanship. I've trained in magic too long before enrolling here. Having him face me in a live exchange might be risky. The professor waved it off. Regardless of the gap in ability, you'll both use Ether Bullet. Only you won't die, and I won't tell you to hold back. After all, the gray-haired one behind you is this year's God's Eye. Student, go ahead and attack. At those words, everyone turned around, their curiosity toward a God's Eye. Student instantly ignited. Gray felt a chill run through him. It was as if he'd been pushed into the spotlight, surrounded on all sides. That old man had just laid everything bare. The instructor looked at Gray with a sly smile, as if to say, let's see how capable you really are. Skipping class under my watch. Leon stood up once more in that case. I'll teach him what rules are. His eyes burned with anger. I'll show him what this academy is really like. Gray couldn't understand why Leon held such hostility toward him. You be the genius, I'll be the special admit. Why can't we stay out of each other's way? An awkward expression crept on a Gray's face. He had no idea how long Leon intended to keep harassing him. Moments later, Gray and Leon stepped onto the platform together. The instructor explained that once he gave a signal, they would fire either bullets at each other. Gray felt uneasy. He'd only studied magic for a few days at the training camp. Even if the instructor claimed no one would die, escaping without injury seemed unlikely. At the signal, Leon swiftly condensed an ether bullet in his palm and sneered, I'll show you the difference between us. Ray had no choice. He spread his palm and released the ether bullet. He had learned long ago. Leon's ether bullet shot forward first, but its size was pitifully small. In contrast, the ether bullet Gray unleashed was massive. More like a cannon shot. The difference between the two was nearly 300-fold. For a split second, both Gray and Leon froze. Leon couldn't understand why Gray's ether bullet was so different from his own, while Gray was just as confused about why. Leon's version was nothing like the one he remembered. But the moment the ether bullet left Gray's hand, there was no stopping it. Leon's face went pale. If something with that level of power hit him directly, he would die without question. At that instant, the magic instructor snapped his arm upward, golden magic flaring to life along it. The spell formed a protective barrier that intercepted the ether bullet, barely preserving Leon's life. The instructor was shaken to the core. That was far too close, but before he could even process how Gray had produced such a massive ether bullet, the cracks spread across the surface of the barrier. In the next moment, the barrier shattered completely, releasing a violent shockwave that sent both of them flying. The powerful aftermath swept through the room, forcing everyone to shut their eyes. Leon's body was hurled backward, battered by the overwhelming impact. The instructor rushed over at once. Are you all right? When he reached Leon, he saw his body trembling uncontrollably. Leon struggled to his feet and said he was fine. For the most part, without the protective barrier, he would have been dead on the spot. After confirming that Leon wasn't seriously injured, the instructor fixed his gaze on Gray. If the barrier hadn't reduced the impact, that single blow would have taken Leon's life. Just who is this young man? The instructor knew he needed a serious conversation with Gray. There were too many questions that needed answers. Even among the professors, no one could unleash an ether bullet of that magnitude. It felt as if he had discovered an entirely new world. At the same time, Gray stared at his own hand in disbelief. Why was Leon's ether bullet so different from his? Leon's spell had been far too weak. That definitely wasn't the version Gray knew. Could it be that the ether bullet Gray learned in the suppression unit differed for what the academy taught? After all that training came from magic theory, 10 years in the future still, Gray asked with feigned confusion, did I use the wrong spell? The instructor sighed. What you used was definitely ether bullet. There's no mistake about that. The professor spoke gravely. The ether bullet you fired was fundamentally different. What you used was absolutely not a standard ether bullet. Based on my understanding, That was a super compressed ether bullet. The entire class froze. None of them had ever heard of such an advanced form of compression magic. The professor demonstrated an ether bullet himself, but it was far smaller than Grace. This is a power even professors struggle to control. Yet in that moment, you didn't just fire it. You stabilized and reshaped it into a complete spell. There isn't a single person in this academy who could replicate what you just did. Whispered voices immediately spread through the hall. That's the strongest ether bullet I've ever seen. Is this why he was specially admitted? Through the god's eye then. Shouldn't he have been placed directly into the magic curriculum instead of going through a special track? Listening to the discussion, Gray found himself thinking as well. Every spell taught at the suppression unit's training camp had been used this way, to be honest. Even among them, Gray had never considered himself especially gifted in magic. That was why he couldn't fully accept the professor's assessment. Professor, are you joking? With proper training, shouldn't anyone be able to achieve something similar? The professor burst out laughing. That reaction only deepened Gray's confusion. Was I really wrong laughing harder? The professor exclaimed, you're a true genius. Making you study swordsmanship is nothing short of a waste of talent. Hearing that, Gray felt a hint of regret. Isn't that a bit exaggerated? The professor crossed the distance in a single step and spoke earnestly. You should transfer to the magic department and become my direct disciple. I'll personally guarantee it, and I'll oversee all of your magical training. Your talent for magic far surpasses your aptitude for the sword. Gray refused without hesitation. I'll pass, Professor. I've always been told I'm bad at magic. The professor dismissed that outright. Those people simply lack vision. You've already mastered ether compression, and at such a young age, you created a super compressed ether bullet. By this academy standards, you're an unparalleled prodigy. I can personally vouch for that. I don't know which fool claimed you lack magical talent, but they clearly have no idea what they're talking about. Gray, will you really not consider switching to the magic curriculum? The crowd erupted in astonishment. Hearing such praise from a professor, known for rarely complimenting others, was nothing short of shocking. The professor raised a finger and declared, if you refuse to study magic, it will be the greatest loss this world could suffer. One could even call it a crime against magic itself. Gray laughed. Professor, you're exaggerating at that moment. Something clicked. The ether compression the professor mentioned. Gray had heard of it before. His thoughts drifted back to an old lesson. Someone had once told him, you don't truly understand what OD life force really is. That's why casting proper magic is so difficult. You must continuously compress the ether within you, then selectively use only the portions that happen to intermingle with OD. Back then, the instructor had explained it this way. Looking back now, it carried a deeper meaning. Graydon asked the professor whether he had ever heard of OD. The professor looked completely puzzled. Oh, what is that supposed to be? From his reaction, Gray confirmed one thing. The concept of OD was still unknown in this era. If that was the case, then everything he had learned in the suppression unit was knowledge from the future, concepts this world had yet to discover. Gray would have to be extremely careful about who he revealed this to, or it could cause serious upheaval. The professor asked excitedly, are you really sure you won't transfer to the magic curriculum? Gray answered calmly, I'm sorry, I love swordsmanship more. I truly appreciate the offer, but I'll have to decline. The professor let out a helpless sigh. If your mind is already made up, then there's nothing I can do. Still, I won't give up. If you ever change your mind, you can come find me anytime. Gray scratched his head, feeling a little embarrassed. Thank you very much for the offer. The professor then told Gray to return to his seat, adding that he wouldn't scold him, even if he lost focus during class. If the lesson felt boring, he was free to leave at any time. In the professor's eyes, this kind of basic class was already meaningless. For someone like Gray, the students immediately burst into discussion. That guy's incredible, I can't believe. Professor Carlos thinks so highly of him. Watching this today was worth it. As Gray walked away, Leon took an unconscious step forward. His heart was pounding wildly in his chest. A red rose suddenly bloomed within his heart. At that moment, the once proud Leon had already begun to admire Gray. From the bottom of his heart, a chill ran through Gray. Don't tell me I'm getting dragged into trouble again. After class, he received a note from Professor Ariel. Come to my office after school. The message caught him off guard. He hadn't expected to be summoned so suddenly. Gray couldn't help wondering if Professor Carlos was behind this, trying to convince Ariel to transfer him into the magic department before long. He arrived outside Ariel's office, hoping his worries were unfounded. He knocked lightly, only to realize the door wasn't locked at all. After waiting with no response, Gray stepped inside on his own. Sorry for the intrusion, he said. The next instant, a sword came flying straight at him. Almost purely on instinct, Gray drew the blade at his waist. With a single fluid motion, he knocked the attacker away. The movement smooth and decisive. The girl froze in surprise, clearly not expecting him to react so fast. What she didn't know was that it wasn't conscious thought at all. Gray's body had simply responded on its own. Still, one question lingered. Why was I attacked the moment I walked in? Then Gray's eyes widened. The girl in front of him looked strangely familiar. She slowly turned around, revealing blue hair, golden eyes, and a delicate, striking appearance sitting nearby. Professor Ariel aft impressive reflexes. It seems my judgment was right. Bringing you into the academy was the correct choice. Two other instructors stood nearby. Clearly unconvinced, one muttered, Bella, were you holding back just now? Did your mentor tell you to go easy? Your form was flawless, but your sword got knocked away far too easily. That doesn't add up. Hearing the name Bella, Gray's heart skipped, so it really was her. Bella, or Black, in his previous life. She had gone on to become a witch, and the very mage who once taught him magic. Ariel couldn't be bothered to humor them. She said coldly, are you too serious? Saying something like that, if you can't even tell whether he was holding back, maybe you should consider resigning as professors. The man burst out laughing. Relax, Ariel. It was just a joke. As he spoke, he casually handed over the coins in his hand, watching them openly gamble right in front of him. Gray calmly sheathed his sword, a trace of irritation surfacing in his thoughts. This is seriously off-putting. He then asked bluntly, you weren't using me as the wager, were you? Ariel didn't deny it. We bet on whether you could withstand Bella's surprise attack. Thanks to you, I won quite a bit. With a flick of her thumb, she tossed a coin his way. That's your share. The moment the coin landed in his hand, all of Gray's annoyance vanished. This single coin was enough to cover an entire year of living expenses. One of the instructors studied Gray's arm and spoke up. Just as Ariel said, from that brief exchange, it looked like he deliberately avoided using his dominant arm, almost as if he were instinctively protecting an arm that couldn't move properly. Another instructor nodded. His right arm is almost certainly injured, and badly. It doesn't look like a simple muscle injury. This feels deeper. A superficial wound wouldn't cause that. Most likely it suffered a powerful impact, or was damaged by some external force. If left untreated, it could turn into a lingering condition. The analysis left Gray stunned. So this is the World Union Academy. They could deduce all that with just a glance. The two chuckled. If we couldn't see even that much, we wouldn't be qualified to teach here. But it seems Ariel already noticed. During the entrance exam, Ariel finally lost her patience. Now that you understand, could you two please leave? He is my student, and I won't abandon him. Don't act like you know better than I do. Before leaving, the two instructors added one last remark. We admit he has potential. At least for now, we hope you'll guide him properly. But there's something you must keep in mind. If that injury can't be healed, it means he still hasn't truly met the Academy standards. In that case, his path here will be extremely difficult. Their warning sent a chill through Gray's chest. Looks like I really need to find a way to heal my arm. Once they left, only 3 people remained in the room. Ariel spoke again finally. The annoying ones are gone. Now, Finn, let's talk about magic, and about the girl standing beside you. I heard something interesting today. Apparently you used super compressed ether in Professor Carlos's class. Carlos told me himself. He even came to my office and asked that you be transferred to the magic division, but I turned him down. As she finished speaking, Ariel slowly set her coffee cup down. Under her gaze, Gray felt completely exposed. She could tell at a glance that he was better suited to wielding a sword than casting spells. When their eyes met, Gray was startled. Her pupils, they changed. Ariel stated calmly that he didn't appear skilled at ether compression. He didn't even look like someone who had practiced it properly. Gray took a guilty sip of tea. She saw through it instantly. I really shouldn't lie in front of her. He admitted it outright. He had never formally trained in compression magic. Gray's answer was completely within Ariel's expectations, since no one could lie in front of her. Yet she still wanted to know what kind of trick he had used, and promised she would never tell anyone, even offering him a reward. Her insistence on understanding compression magic was for the sake of the girl beside her. I want you to become her teacher, because this compression magic is tied to her fate. Hearing that, Gray wondered if Professor Ariel had called him here, specifically because of Bella. Ariel confirmed it. Although she was a genius in magical theory, her practical application was still far from the top level. No matter what she tried, she simply couldn't properly use ether compression, which was why she couldn't create super compressed ether. In his previous life, Gray had heard that Bella Albright was a resident, and now the reason was clear. according to what Professor Ariel had heard from Professor Carlos. When Gray used super compressed ether, it didn't even look like compression. If there were a way to use super compressed ether without actually compressing ether, then she wouldn't need to be sent to Professor Bradley. Gray slowly set his coffee down, quietly repeating the name Professor Bradley. The next moment, he froze. You mean Varian Bradley? Ariel nodded. I knew you'd heard of him. Of course, Gray had. Varian Bradley was infamous. That man had conducted countless human experiments, killing many in the process. Worse still, he had triggered catastrophic magical disasters that claimed tens of thousands of lives. One of the most heinous magical criminals in history, and in this era still at large. If Bella can't produce super compressed ether by the end of the year, Ariel said calmly, she'll be sent there for what they call surgery. Gray's heart sank. Sending Bella there was no different from signing her death warrant. Officially, it was meant to enhance magical aptitude. In reality, it was nothing but inhumane experimentation, which is why Ariel said quietly, Bella's life is now in your hands. Gray didn't answer right away. Instead, he thought carefully. What he possessed was magical knowledge that didn't yet exist in this era, revealing it could very well alter the course of history. Bella's hands had begun to tremble. She clearly wanted Gray's help, yet she never tried to force him into making a choice. Gray noticed that all Bella was destined to become one of the future campaign's core combatants. She couldn't afford to fail, because the Arbiter was simply too powerful. Gaining one more ally of that caliber would dramatically improve their odds. Gray had experienced that despair firsthand, and he had no intention of ever reliving it. If the future could be reshaped under his guidance, the world's expedition forces would grow far stronger, no longer to be wiped out by a single blow. Thinking that far ahead, Gray let out a quiet chuckle. In that case, why not try? Even if it was only to change Bella's fate, that so-called future hell. Changing it could only be for the better. For the next moment, as if a decision had been made, Gray set his coffee cup down firmly on the table. He smiled at Bella. Don't worry. I'll teach you how to use super compressed ether. With your talent, you'll pick it up quickly. 3 hours later, at the arena, Gray brought over a chalkboard and began explaining fundamental magical theory. Everything centered around super compressed ether. This was all the magical knowledge he possessed. As agreed, none of it was to be revealed as coming from him. In response, both Bella and Professor Ariel reassured Gray. We sign a magic contract. If it's ever broken, the violator dies. There's no second outcome. Gray waved a hand and looked at Bella. So after hearing everything I just explained, do you have any thoughts? If you do, feel free to say them. Professor Ariel felt a headache coming on. While she understood magic, her true specialty lay in swordsmanship. Even grasping the concept of OD during Gray's explanation had been shocking enough. What followed went far beyond her expectations, leaving her mind struggling to process it all. At that moment, Bella stepped forward slowly. Even though the magic you described is extremely complex, its structure is incredibly clear. If I had to put it into words, it feels like listening to a magic lecture from 100 years in the future. She praised him with an adorably earnest expression. Just hearing your explanation alone would be enough to push the history of magic forward by a century. You truly deserve to be called a magical genius. Gray felt a little embarrassed. That's because it really is future knowledge. He thought knowledge from 10 years ahead, no less, and originally taught by her. Magic had advanced at an astonishing pace during that decade, making it feel as though an entire century had been skipped. Unable to fully comprehend Gray's theory herself, Professor Ariel turned to Bella. There's a lot I can't accurately judge. Tell me, does what he's saying actually hold up? Bella nodded seriously. This theory is very likely correct. It doesn't contradict current magical principles. Moreover, she believed the fastest way to verify it was through direct testing. That's why we came here today. Bella took a deep breath and spoke softly. If everything Professor Gray said is true, then this spell I'm holding should work. If Bella's incantation truly matched the theory Gray had explained, then the resulting scene would be almost unimaginable. The next moment, Bella began casting her magic. This was the first time she had ever unleashed her power without holding anything back. Gray was stunned. This is her full power. If his memory served him right, Bella's full strength attack in the future could level an entire city. He couldn't help but wonder just how much magic she could wield. 10 years earlier, a massive magic circle unfolded before their eyes. At her current level, Bella clearly struggled to fully control such an overwhelming output of power. and Gray immediately sensed that something was wrong. But Bella didn't hesitate. All she wanted was to test this new form of magic. Her lips moved continuously as she recited the spell, her focus absolute in the next second. A brilliant, golden light completely enveloped Gray's body. Then the golden radiance surged skyward, as if trying to pierce the heavens themselves. Gray was left speechless. So this is what Bella was capable of 10 years ago. No wonder she would later become one of the core pillars of the future expedition force. That overwhelming power was enough to instill fear. Had Bella not gained control at the final moment, Gray would have lost his life on the spot. Just moments earlier, a blazing mass of flame had been charging straight toward his face. Yet, right before impact, the spell abruptly changed course, clearly under Bella's direct control. Joy flooded Bella's heart. She had succeeded on her very first attempt, and even managed to control it. Under her guidance, the flames slowly took shape, transforming into a soaring dragon of fire. Gray couldn't help but admire her. She really is a genius, such a complex spell, and she had not only understood it instantly, she had brought it to life. Gray was certain of one thing: if Bella stood with him, he could one day cultivate an entire generation of magical prodigies to fight the purifiers by his side. The fire spell erupted with terrifying force, then faded just as quickly. In moments, Bella's ether reserves were completely drained. Exhausted, she collapsed to the ground. Classic symptoms of magical overuse. Gray rushed over anxiously to check on her. Bella was one of the future's key pillars. Nothing could happen to her. Ariel spoke from behind him, sounding relaxed. She's just asleep. Why are you so worried? Bella is still innocent at this age. Don't go getting any strange ideas. Gray couldn't help but laugh in exasperation, but he didn't bother responding. As long as Bella was safe, that was all that mattered. Even in her half-conscious state, Bella glanced up at the flames, still lingering in the air, disbelief filling her expression. She had constructed magic of that scale in such a short time. Just before slipping fully into sleep, she murmured softly, "The amazing part isn't me. It's the theory. Being able to use ultra-compressed ether so easily. That's all thanks to Lord Gray's knowledge." What she didn't realize was that the theory itself had originally been her own creation, simply brought forward in time by Gray. Professor Ariel let out a soft laugh. Since she can already create super compressed forms, there's no longer any need for surgery. I'll personally inform Brad this matter is canceled. He felt a wave of relief. They had narrowly avoided a procedure with an extreme risk of failure. What reassured him even more was that Bella hadn't lost control over her magic. That alone was proof of how terrifying her potential truly was. Turning his head, he asked with some curiosity, "When you say it, do you mean her control over magic?" "Exactly, control," Ariel confirmed. "Bradley's procedure can boost her magical output, but the price is a loss of control. The exact mechanism is classified, but seems to involve forcibly breaking through internal limiters." Hearing this, he rubbed his chin in realization. So that was it in the past world. The witch who failed to wield her overwhelming power had undergone that very procedure. There was no doubt about it. Ariel burst into laughter. "But thanks to you, Bella can now produce super compressed forms. That means the conditions of our contract have been fulfilled." With a flick of her hand, she continued, "Now it's my turn to honor the agreement. First your arm." Ariel had already made up her mind. She intended to cast a spell known as Heal to restore his injured arm. In the next instant, blue magical energy surged from her palm, making him stare in astonishment. She pressed the glowing energy against the back of his hand and began treating his damaged right arm. A powerful healing force wrapped around his entire arm, bringing with it a cool, soothing sensation. The spell worked quickly. Ariel asked him how it felt. He rotated his wrist and immediately noticed the improvement. What shocked him most was that his wrist could now move as freely as it once had. Excitement surged through Gray. "Thank you so much, Professor. Does this mean I officially qualify for admission to the Academy?" Still, one question lingered in his mind. Even magic healing potions had failed. So how had Ariel resolved the issue so effortlessly? Professor Ariel laughed softly. "Don't lump my nerve restoration magic together with ordinary healing potions." After that, she hesitated for a moment, clearly still concerned. "Your arm really feels the same as before, right? Why don't you try swinging your sword and test it?" Gray stepped aside and slowly drew his blade. "All right then, I'll test the flexibility of my arm." He swung once lightly. The sensation felt strange. Frowning, he glanced down at his wrist and decided to try again. Whoosh whoosh that. He unleashed dozens of rapid swings, each one matching the speed he used in the past. Unfortunately, the results were still far from ideal. Sweat trickled down his cheek. Gray stopped and turned to Ariel. My arm, it doesn't feel as flexible as it used to. Professor. Ariel pinched the bridge of her nose and sighed. Just as I suspected, I repaired your nerves. But my magic can't heal damage to the soul. Gray looked confused. Does that mean the soul actually exists? Ariel nodded. You heard me correctly. The soul does exist. Even if modern magical theory hasn't proven it yet, I firmly believe it's real. The reason she could say that with such certainty was simple. Ariel possessed an ability so terrifying. It bordered on the unnatural. Her eyes could see souls. This was a secret she had never shared with anyone. Through her vision, she could see Gray's soul slowly repairing itself, as long as he didn't overexert himself. With sword techniques, his arm would function normally. Gray frowned slightly. If I can't overuse my sword, does that mean I shouldn't train for a while? Ariel shook her head calmly. Don't worry. Training at your usual level is completely fine. In truth, Ariel carried a question she had never voiced. What kind of swordsmanship could possibly injure a person's soul? So deeply grated an answer, and she wisely changed the subject. After all, history did record techniques that were driven by the soul itself. Ariel's expression turned serious. That man is Amy White, you know him. Don't you? Gray felt a jolt run through him. He nodded. I do. But the question itself unsettled him. Why bring up the Sword Saint now? At this point in time, they shouldn't even know each other. Ariel was convinced, because the way Gray wielded his sword carried a clear imprint, something unmistakably learned from Amy White. It was far too similar to be coincidence. Yet after a closer look, she sensed a subtle difference. The one who taught you seems even stronger than Amy. Her brows knit together in confusion. That said, in a few more years, Amy should be just as strong as your master. Her insight left Gray genuinely surprised. She had pieced together far more than he expected. Still, no matter how sharp her intuition was, she could never imagine the truth. That Gray had learned his swordsmanship from Amy. 10 years in the future, he couldn't tell her that. All he could say was that he trained at a dojo, back in his hometown. But can swordsmanship really damage the soul? Ariel answered without hesitation. That's impossible. Ordinary sword techniques cannot harm the soul. For one thing, a normal strike could never defeat an ogre general in a single blow, let alone sever everything around it, monsters and trees included. She was referring to the scene where Gray had slain the ogre general. Clearly, she already knew what had happened. Ariel chuckled softly. That's exactly why. The wager was basically a guaranteed win. She had personally examined part of the aftermath. The destruction was nothing short of magnificent, far beyond what even the most advanced cleaving magic could achieve. That was why she concluded that a mysterious power existed within Gray, and that he had used it. Her deduction was frighteningly close to the truth. Gray couldn't help thinking that if Ariel truly saw it, things would get complicated. Her pupils shifted once more. I can see it. Power seeping out from a door bound by chains. Gray's heart sank for the first time. He truly felt something was wrong. Ariel was absolutely not normal, because she had seen the door inside him. This wasn't something anyone could guess. She definitely knew more than she was letting on. Ariel raised a finger, her voice calm. That said, I've encountered powers similar to yours before. I don't believe they're the same, but the feeling is remarkably alike. After hearing Ariel's words, Gray immediately pressed on. What exactly is this similar power you mentioned? Are you saying there are others besides me who possess the same kind of power? Ariel answered without hesitation, yes. Though, I can't say for certain whether they're still human. They're called the Purgers. That's what they're known as. Gray completely lost his composure. How much did Ariel actually know? And why were the Purgers being mentioned in this era? At all, Ariel's gaze never left his face. Have you heard of them before? She continued, calmly, judging by your reaction. I'd say yes, honestly. I didn't expect them to be that well known. Then again, considering you're familiar with forward-looking magical theories, I suppose it's not that surprising. They made Gray feel awkward. In truth, those so-called theories were nothing more than knowledge from the future, concepts that hadn't been developed yet. And Ariel asked with open curiosity, how much do you know about the Purgers? Tell me everything you can. Gray hesitated. Should he really tell her the truth? Even if he did, she probably wouldn't believe him. All he knew for sure was this. The Purgers were extremely dangerous to humanity, and their power was overwhelming. They had to be stopped before they ever appeared. And if that wasn't possible, then no matter the cost, they had to be eliminated. After a moment of thought, Ariel nodded. Your stance may be extreme, but I agree they're incredibly dangerous. Even so, Varian Bradley still seems intent on continuing his experiments. That left Gray confused, that madman. Does this really have something to do with him? Ariel let out a cold laugh. Of course it does, in fact. The connection is significant. According to the information she possessed, the Purgers were precisely the beings Varian had been attempting to summon. Gray froze. The Purgers were something humans try to create. Then why had he never heard of this in the future? Thinking back, he suddenly realized something unsettling. On the previous timeline, the Academy had acted as if it already knew when and where the Purgers would emerge. A chilling possibility surfaced in Gray's mind, sending a shiver down his spine. What if the Academy had been involved in the summoning of the Purgers? From the very beginning, if his suspicion was correct, then the Academy itself was the origin of everything that followed. Without even thinking it through, Gray blurted out, urging Ariel to stop the experiment. To his surprise, Ariel shared the same intent. Unfortunately, the professor in charge of the project held the same rank as she did. She had no authority to shut him down or to terminate the experiment outright. In fact, Ariel had already pressured the upper administration to cancel the project, but they had ignored her. That only made Gray wonder who these so-called higher-ups really were. On this matter, even Ariel was powerless. Gray simply lacked the clearance. Without an order from above, no one could forcibly halt the experiment. Gray let out a long sigh. They won't even give a name. The Academy's leadership is far more tangled than I imagined. Then a thought struck him that if they could prove that madman was a criminal, wouldn't that solve everything? In the previous timeline, Varian Bradley's illegal experiments had cost tens of thousands of lives, and Gray even knew where those experiments had taken place. With that in mind, he immediately made a proposal to Ariel. I know where he's conducting the illegal experiments. If we catch him in the act, we might be able to put an end to this. Ariel rejected the idea once again. That won't work. Entering a professor's research facility without authorization is a serious crime in itself. If you can't present solid evidence, the only ones who will end up in prison will be us, she said bluntly, unless you already have proof of his crimes. Her words left Gray silent. He didn't have any concrete evidence, and without it this matter would have to be put on hold. But with that topic settled, Ariel turned her attention to Gray's power. Don't you want to learn how to control it? The question sent a shock through him. Was she saying it was actually possible for him to master his own power? She shook her head. I can't teach you that. But there is a professor at the Academy who specializes in dealing with unknown forces. His name is Siskit. Gray's heart skipped a beat at the name Siskit, the man who had personally trained the sword. Saint Ariel had clearly anticipated his reaction. Tomorrow, I'll arrange for you to begin private training. With him, Gray nearly shouted. In his mind, this was perfect. He had come to the Academy for this exact purpose, to gain control over that power. And now a lead had appeared far sooner than he expected. The next day, Gray began special training under the guidance of a true powerhouse. The one instructing him was none other than Siskit, Langfellow himself, in a one-on-one private session. What surprised Gray was that the so-called training consisted of nothing but running. He had no idea what the instructor intended to teach, but he knew one thing: he only needed to obey. At that moment, Siskit suddenly turned his head. Your mind is drifting. I can feel it. You lack focus if you still have time to daydream. Then pick up the pace and run harder. Listen carefully, Siskit said coldly. Only when every last drop of your stamina is drained, with the power of the soul awakened. As long as you have even a trace of strength left. We don't touch the sword, understood? Gray more or less understood what he meant. Even if he didn't grasp it completely, he would follow through after all. The man before him was among the strongest. And so Gray endured a full week of brutal, hellish training with him. Once the training ended, Gray returned to Ariel. She asked how things had gone with Siskit. Gray replied, awkwardly honestly, I didn't feel much. I just ran every day, but my body definitely feels stronger now. As for swordsmanship, we only practiced a little at the very end. Adil chuklet softly. That sound exactly like that old man style. At that moment, someone walked in, interrupting their conversation. It was a woman. She handed Ariel a sealed letter. Gray wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but as Ariel read the letter, her body visibly trembled. A second later, her expression twisted with rage. Gray stepped forward at once. Is something wrong with the letter? But when Gray read its contents himself, his expression turned just as grim. The letter stated that, although Bella had produced results, related to super compressed ether. The inspection concluded that it did not qualify as true compression, therefore. It cannot be officially recognized, and the responsibility was attributed to Varian Bradley. Rage surged through Gray. He couldn't stop himself from cursing out loud. That man was nothing but a lunatic. Ariel gestured for Gray to calm down. From the look of the variant, Bradley was determined to force Bella into the surgery, even though she no longer needed it. Gray offered a simple solution. Then have Bella refuse, unfortunately. That wasn't an option. The contract was already in effect, unless Bradley himself invalidated it. Bella had only two choices: withdraw from the academy or undergo the surgery. The news sent a chill through Gray's entire body. If Bella went through with that procedure, her future would be ruined. The next moment, Ariel slammed her hand onto the desk, her gaze unwavering. Gray, I need your help. What she wanted was the location of Bradley's laboratory. If she could expose his crimes, the contract would automatically become void. Hearing that, Gray smiled faintly. Didn't you tell me before that acting without evidence was dangerous? He asked, so why aren't you afraid now? The reason Ariel made this decision was simple. She trusted him. If they found that place, there would be evidence. Perhaps she had believed him from the very beginning. Her eyes had already shown her the truth. She was certain now that everything Gray had said was real. It had just taken her this long to fully accept it. Gray replied calmly, you should have trusted me sooner. I hope you'll trust me more from now on. I won't lie to you. Ariel nodded and asked him to guide her immediately. Then let's work together, she said, and expose everything that man has done. Gray told her plainly. The laboratory was hidden in the mountains near Toriel Village. Ariel was familiar with the area. What surprised her was that Bradley had chosen to hide near such a small, remote settlement. Gray knew exactly what was happening there. Bradley was conducting illegal experiments inside a facility that operated under official authorization. Ariel agreed. It was an ideal location for secret research. More importantly, the academy never interfered with another professor's laboratory. As long as they obtained concrete evidence, they wouldn't be accused of trespassing. At that moment, the door suddenly opened and Bella stepped inside. Her expression was heavy as she looked at them. Professor Gray, I received this letter today as well. Ariel immediately stepped forward, catching the letter between her fingers. She told Bella not to worry. She and Gray would handle this matter. Bella had already guessed what Ariel intended to do. Professor, are you really going to confront them for my sake? She asked, and alone. Ariel paused, a faint smile forming. At the corner of her lips, she turned back toward Bella, her voice calm and resolute. I alone am enough. Bella still couldn't put her mind at ease, and instinctively looked toward Gray. At that moment, Gray asked Ariel to wait. He said he wanted to go with her. Bella agreed immediately. This concerned her very life. There was no way she could stay behind. Ariel felt a headache coming on. You're dealing with a madman who has repeatedly conducted dangerous human experiments, she said grimly. If he captures either of you, no one knows what he'll do. I can't let you risk yourselves by going there. Gray disagreed. If you go alone, that's even more dangerous. He said, if I use the same power I used to defeat the Ogre General, I should be able to support you. Besides, if something happens to you, I'd be expelled immediately as a God's Eye student. So please at least let us choose our own fate. We won't be a burden, we'll be your help. Ariel looked at the two of them and fell into a brief silence. Then she let out a deep sigh. From the sound of it, even if I tried to stop you, you'd follow me anyway, fine. She said, at last, I'll allow you to come. But on one condition, no matter what happens. Your personal safety comes first. Gray and Bella answered at the same time, solemnly agreeing even without her saying it. They understood. Soon after, the three of them set out for the mountain. Under Gray's guidance, they arrived in front of a building. Bella hesitated. Is he really conducting illegal experiments? In a place like this, Ariel told her not to doubt it. What mattered now was entering and finding evidence. Gray spoke with absolute certainty. I'm sure of it, he's in there. Seeing his confidence, Ariel and Bella's eyes sharpened. If you say so, they said, then we trust you. Ariel shared a piece of good news first. Varian Bradley should be attending a Magic Association meeting right now, which meant he wasn't here. However, the main entrance was likely rigged with traps, so they would have to break in through a side entrance. From that point on, it was time for Ariel to take the lead. She made it clear that once inside, their top priority was to secure solid evidence. At that moment, Bella hesitated and asked again, Professor, are you really going this far for me? Is someone like me truly worth all this? Before Ariel could respond, Gray cut, and you got that wrong. He said firmly, stopping his experiments is for the sake of this world, not just for you, do you understand? A moment later, at Ariel's command, all three of them charged forward. Gray moved faster than the other two, taking the lead at the same time. Flames began to gather in Ariel's hand. With a sweeping motion, countless bursts of fire slammed into the sidewall, blasting it apart in an instant. The power of her magic was overwhelming. A single casual spell created destruction on that scale. Gray couldn't help but be stunned that. Weren't they supposed to be sneaking in? This was anything but subtle. After a massive hole was blown open in the sidewall, the three of them rushed inside. But the moment Gray saw what lay within, he froze. The laboratory was littered with corpses. Every single one of them, Bradley's experimental subjects. Ariel had planned to carefully search for evidence, but after a single glance, she realized it was everywhere. Just then they noticed something else ahead. Not far away stood a structure that looked unmistakably like an altar. Bella faltered. What do we do now? Do we stick to the plan, take the evidence, and leave? Or do we save anyone who's still alive? Gray turned to her immediately. This place is too dangerous to stay if we waste time. Varian could come back at any moment. The instant his words fell, a stranger's voice echoed behind them. A figure slowly approached from the shadows. Were you calling for me just now? The moment Ariel recognized him, she spoke calmly. So, how did your meeting go, Varian? The man slowly approaching them was none other than the twisted experimentalist himself, Professor Varian Bradley. Gray immediately shifted into a combat stance. He never imagined that Varian would show up here. In person, Varian replied evenly. I sent a substitute to attend the meeting in my place. I have far more important experiments here. Leaving was never an option. Ariel frowned slightly. And what exactly is this important experiment you're talking about? As it turned out, Varian had recently acquired a batch of fresh, experimental materials and intended to test them while they were still usable. Unfortunately for him, the plan had changed. Their intrusion forced him to revise it on spot. As even Ariel's expression hardened, one intense, killing intent. Gray, on the other hand, remained surprisingly calm. They had seen things they were never meant to see. Being silenced was inevitable. Varian's gaze locked onto the three of them. He didn't know how they had learned the location of the laboratory, but one thing was certain. They hadn't told anyone else before coming, which meant that if the three of them disappeared here, no suspicion would ever fall on him. Bella was nearly frozen in fear. Ariel's irritation surged. Don't tell me you're planning to turn us into experimental subjects. Varian chuckled softly. Don't be so dramatic. Your sacrifice will push the boundaries of magic itself. Since I can't let you leave alive, I'll make sure you're put to the best possible use. In the next instant, a massive fireball was launched, straight at Varian's face. The sudden attack clearly caught Varian off guard. A thunderous boom echoed as the fireball detonated right in front of him. Ariel instinctively glanced at Bella, clearly surprised by how decisively the girl had acted. Bella's expression was cold and resolute, not a trace of hesitation in her eyes. Her hatred toward Varian ran deep. There was no mercy in her strike, and yet to everyone's shock, the attack hadn't dealt Varian any damage at all. Varian spoke with an almost playful tone. So the gods, Ariel is still as sharp as ever. I never expected your special admit to possess such outstanding talent. As well, he narrowed his eyes. In that case, I'll have to be more careful. After all, besides Bella, there's another God's Eye candidate standing here. His gaze shifted to Gray, his voice dripping with disdain. I find your little tricks laughable. Mere academy students daring to assassinate a professor. How utterly disgraceful. Bella let out a cold laugh. I'd rather kill than be killed. Too bad I didn't seize the chance to blow you to pieces. In one shot, Ariel immediately ordered the two of them to retreat. She could already sense the situation spiraling out of control. More importantly, they had obtained the evidence. Everything else should be handled by the Academy. Unfortunately, whether they wanted to leave or not wasn't entirely up to them. In the next instant, Varian unleashed a burst of dark magic, aimed straight at Bella at the critical moment. Ariel expanded a golden barrier in front of them. She once again urged Bella to leave immediately, declaring that she would handle everything from here on out, but Varian interrupted her coldly. Futile, this is one of my research on devouring flame, a fire that consumes defensive magic and converts it into my own power. As the two spells clashed, the golden barrier began to crack under the prolonged pressure. In theory, this spell was nearly impossible to block. Its only drawback was the consumption of rare materials. Moments later, Ariel's golden barrier was on the verge of being completely devoured by the black flames. In the next instant, a sharp blue light burst from her eyes. A second defensive magic circle, this one glowing blue, materialized behind the original golden barrier. Yet the dark magic showed no fear at all. It slammed straight into the defenses. Without hesitation, cracks spread rapidly across Ariel's barrier once again. She immediately ordered Bella, "Hand me the spell memory band." Ariel had already recorded everything happening on site. Once Cisco saw the footage, he would know exactly how to proceed. But Bella didn't respond instead. She slammed her staff hard against the ground. Centered on Bella, a brand new defensive magic circle expanded outward. A circular barrier. Ariel panicked. "What are you doing? I told you to retreat immediately." But Bella had no intention of leaving Ariel behind. She had seen the cracks forming in Ariel's shield and stepped in to reinforce the defense. Ariel clenched her teeth. "We agreed before coming here. If anything goes wrong, your life comes first." Variant's magic is clearly abnormal. Even defensive arrays can't withstand it all by time. And you need to leave now. Yet at the exact moment she finished speaking, her own defensive array shattered. Fear flashed through Ariel's eyes. Only 2 minutes, and it broke through. There's definitely something wrong with that spell. But as Ariel's defense collapsed, Bella remained calm, even if your defense is destroyed. "Professor, it doesn't matter." The black flames surged forward, colliding head-on with Bella's defensive magic. From Bella's perspective, Varian's spell wasn't incomprehensible. It simply required a different defensive structure. Varian was stunned. "That's impossible. The counter theory for devouring flame is known only to us. How could you possibly know it?" Bella chuckled softly. "Recently, someone taught me a new theory. With it, every magical formula looks incredibly simple to me." Hearing that, Varian's lips twitched. "You're saying you broke my dark magic with nothing more than a new theory?" He clearly didn't believe it. His voice turned cold. "Tell me who the traitor is. Say it, and I'll grant you a painless death." Bella smiled lightly. "You want to know who taught me? Sorry, that's a secret I'm not telling you." Gray was momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected Bella to show such composure. But in the next instant, his expression hardened. He stared ahead and warned her immediately. This attack was dangerous. Varian pulled out a dark red crystal from his robe. Without hesitation, he crushed it in his hand. "If you're so eager to die," he said coldly, "then perish in my flames." In the next second, more than a dozen skeletal forms burst out of the shattered crystal. They twisted together like tangled ropes, rapidly merging into a single mass. Then a grotesque, gaping maw formed and lunged straight toward Gray. "Gray, warned Bella." Again she replied that she could still hold on. Even so, panic crept in. Her mana reserves were nearly depleted. Varian noticed it instantly. "With your reserves, you'll last 1 more minute at best." Bella shouted anxiously, "Professor." "Attack him now. I'll maintain the defense at full power." At those words, a sharp blue light flared in Ariel's eyes. Her gods. I analyzed Variant's spell structure at high speed, searching for its weak point. Once found, she could project magic beyond the barrier. She lifted her hand slightly. A thin thread of electricity slipped past the shield. After confirming the weakness, Ariel unleashed everything. Lightning erupted across her entire body. With a fierce shout, she sent all the thunder crashing into Varian's dark magic. The lightning struck with incredible speed and force, but the result was grim. The moment the lightning touched the dark spell, it was devoured, erased completely. Varian snorted a counterattack. "Don't be ridiculous at this rate. You won't even be able to touch me." Ariel immediately sensed something was wrong. To think that this dark magic has such powerful, devouring abilities, if she remembered correctly. Ariel's offensive magique was the weakest among the faculty members, and Varian was clearly using the fire element to absorb her magical attacks. Just then Bella could no longer hold on. She gasped and said, "My mana is nearly depleted." What do we do now? If one looked closely, they would see Bella's hands and entire body trembling. Just standing, there was already a great strain on her. Ariel was at a loss. "This is exactly why I told you to leave earlier. You all still underestimate Variant Bradley." The situation had now reached a critical point, and at that moment, Gray stepped forward. He smiled lightly. "Leave this to me. You two rest. It's time for the backup to take the stage." Ariel and Bella were stunned. "You're saying that the things we can't handle, you think you can solve them?" Bella was skeptical. "Your sword won't even reach him." Bray replied nonchalantly, "It doesn't matter. Just watch me handle this." Ariel seemed to realize something. "Are you sure you want to do this? Using that power again might cost you your life. Even if you survive, your healing arm might never recover." Upon hearing that, Gray smiled softly. "I'd rather die alone than have all 3 of us die here." Meanwhile, Varian, his vision obscured by dark magic, couldn't see the situation clearly, but he noticed a red light slowly expanding. And he saw a young man swinging a sword in the air, but the perspective was inverted. The reason for the inverted perspective was because Varian Bradley's head had been severed by Gray. With a single strike, Gray killed Varian. The power of that blow was something Varian couldn't possibly defend against. Gray's expression turned stern. Someone like you should have died long ago. What stood before them now was nothing but Varian's headless body. Bella was in complete disbelief. That strike had completely shattered her worldview. Thud Varian's body and head both dropped to the ground. Adil, even though she had seen the aftermath of the ogre general's battle, widened her eyes in shock. Seeing this firsthand was overwhelming. If this were to be told to anyone, no one would believe it. It was just too shocking. At that moment, Bella noticed fragments of stone falling from above. The next second, the entire ceiling collapsed as massive chunks of stone crashed down. The power of that single strike had clearly reached the structure overhead. Just then, light footsteps moved forward, and with every step, ripples spread beneath them. In the next instant, countless pink laser-like spells rose from the ground, freezing every falling rock in place. Professor Ariel was still caught in the shock of what had just happened. Variant Bradley's magic had restrained her earlier, but dealing with this was effortless by comparison. She then turned her gaze toward Gray. By the way, how's your body holding up? That attack was far more powerful than I expected. With a dull clatter, the sword slipped from Gray's hand and hit the ground. Gray himself didn't understand why, only that his dominant hand throbbed with pain, accompanied by a numbing sensation. He bent down, picked up the sword again, and said, "You don't need to worry. I can still move seeing this." Ariel let out a light chuckle. "That's a lot better than before. Looks like your training is finally paying off." Gray agreed with her assessment. If the one who used that move back in the village had been the current me, I'd have only ended up with a sore arm. Before, I would have passed out for days, and when I woke up, I couldn't even move my arm. Looks like that week of training with the Sword Saint was worth it. What Gray didn't realize was that Professor Ariel's attention had already fixed itself on his right hand. Moments earlier, she had used the God's Eye to examine the structure of his right arm once more, and it seemed to have suffered fresh damage. Walking toward him, she said softly, "Thanks to you, we survived. Still, I'm sorry you had to draw on that power." Again, Gray told her not to worry about it. "I was the one who insisted on stopping Varian Bradley in the first place." Even so, Professor Ariel remained determined to thank him properly. Then her next words made Gray pause. She told him not to use that power again, for the time being, almost pleading. Ariel said, "Please, you have to trust my God's Eye. If you don't, the damage may become irreversible." Hearing this, Gray froze for a moment, then nodded to show he understood. At that moment, Bella spoke up from behind him, asking whether what she had seen earlier counted as magic, and if so, why she hadn't sensed any ether fluctuations at all. In truth, explaining power of that magnitude as magic seemed almost impossible. So what kind of force had he actually used? Ariel cut her off before she could dig any deeper. "I'm sorry, but I need you to stop pursuing this matter. And please, don't mention anything you witnessed here to anyone." Bella, like an endlessly curious child, kept pressing for answers. Ariel sighed in quiet frustration and raised her hand, magic steadily gathering around her fingers. Her expression turned solemn as she addressed Bella. "If you can't agree to my terms, then I'll have no choice but to erase your memories. You have two options: memory eraser or a magic contract." The words startled Bella naturally. She had no desire to lose her memories, so she chose to sign the magic contract. Hearing her decision, Ariel immediately formed a magic contract, letting it float in front of Bella. Without hesitation, Bella signed her name, signaling that the matter was settled, and she would not ask about it again. Ariel then asked Gray how he wanted to proceed. Gray replied that, while he was concerned about the experiments as well, the most urgent priority was helping these people find release. Though they looked no different from corpses, on the surface, they were actually just trapped under magical hypnosis. Ariel snapped her fingers. "They're not in immediate danger, but to be safe, we should transfer them to the Academy medical facility." In the next instant, a mass of golden light appeared before everyone's eyes. The light enveloped all the test subjects present, providing at least temporary protection from outside harm. With the test subject secured, Ariel suggested continuing the investigation. But as she surveyed the area once more, what she saw still defied belief. Illegal experiments were being carried out right before her eyes, nearly all of them involving human sacrifice to create magical catalysts or enhance magical aptitude. Every single experiment was brutal beyond words. Ariel found no experiments connected to the purger, which raised a troubling question. Were those experiments carried out somewhere else? Ray found it just as strange. In his past world, this place had been the site of a catastrophe that claimed tens of thousands of lives. There was no way that merely producing magical catalyst could have caused something on that scale suddenly. Gray's eyes widened as a memory resurfaced. In his previous world, the thing that killed all those people wasn't magic at all. It was miasma surging up from the ground. Realizing this, Gray quickly called out to Ariel and Bella ahead of him. Bella looked confused. Did you think of something? You look really tense, and it wasn't without reason. Gray had a growing sense that something dangerous lay beneath them. If it really turned out to be the Purger, the discovery would be shocking. He explained his suspicions to Ariel, suggesting that there might be a hidden passage. Underground, Ariel glanced at the ground with doubt. It didn't seem likely. Who would build an experimental facility beneath the earth for gods? I swept across every crack in the ground, but unfortunately, it revealed no hidden passageways. That made Gray's theory seem increasingly unlikely. Just as Ariel was about to share her conclusion, her gaze suddenly froze. She immediately told Gray and Bella to stay where they were, then jogged forward on her own. Crouching down, she began to examine the ground with intense focus. The power of the gods I activated once more. The traces were faint, but she could sense remnants of short distance. Teleportation magic. It might be a space that could only be accessed through teleportation. Judging by the residual signatures, the teleport distance was roughly 300 meters, and whatever lay there was likely significant. After hearing her assessment, Gray asked whether it was possible to reach a point 300 meters underground. Ariel replied that she could open a short-distance teleport gate. She snapped her fingers, then let's find out. In the next instant, a magic circle appeared before them. If there was truly nothing on the other side, the gate should open straight into solid earth. Moments later, the teleportation circle Ariel had formed slowly opened. What lay beyond? It left all three of them frozen in shock. Ahead of them stood clusters of small buildings. Varying in size, Ariel stared in disbelief. No one would have imagined that such an enormous space could exist beneath this place at the same time. Bella sensed that something was wrong. Massive ether outputs were surging in from all directions, especially from the center, where the energy was overwhelmingly concentrated. The direction she pointed to was a small building at the very heart of the area, encircled by several towering pillars. A look of shock appeared in Ariel's eyes. This wasn't just ether, there was another force mixed in. Something entirely different from magic. It was leaking out from that spot, and its sheer power surpassed anything she had ever encountered. Hearing this, Gray already had a guess. That unfamiliar force could it be? Ariel cut him off immediately. You're right, the power sealed inside that small chamber is the power of the Purger. The three of them moved deeper into the space, stopping before a solitary door standing ahead of them almost instinctively. All three suspected that the source of the energy lay beyond that door. Ariel carefully examined the surroundings. While the presence of that power was undeniable, there was no sign of the Purger itself. She then tried opening the door, but nothing happened. It was clear to her that the door carried no power of its own. Rather than a seal, it seemed to exist purely as a symbolic component of a ritual, which meant the power wasn't coming from behind the door at all. Ariel shifted her gaze to a nearby, violet container-like device, concluding that the true core, storing the energy, was inside that magical apparatus. What followed was an incredibly bold move on her part. Seeing her action, Gray was stunned. Are you insane? Are you trying to summon the Purger? Bella also realized how dangerous the device was, and instinctively tried to stop her. Ariel, however, remained calm. Don't move. My gods, I already confirmed it. This device can't actually summon the Purger, so there's no need to panic. A sharp cracking sound echoed, as if space itself were tearing apart. The crack quickly widened, revealing nothing but pitch-black darkness inside. Gray and Bella were left speechless, as the space itself was being torn open. Professor, what did you do? Under Ariel's intervention, thin strands of black energy were drawn out from within the rift. Gray stared at the dark energy without blinking. There was no doubt about it. This was the Purger's power. At that moment, Ariel finally grasped the truth. The device had never been meant to summon the Purger. Its real function was to tear open a minuscule crack at the edge of the Purger's domain and siphon the leaking energy. At the center of the room, a mass of black energy floated restlessly, pulsing as if unbounded. The core used to crystallize that power was most likely human life itself. From the traces left behind, at least 10 souls had been consumed, and during the shaping process, far more lives were likely sacrificed. Every conclusion came from what Ariel had seen. Through the gods, based on her observations. A large portion of the people they had seen upstairs had already been taken away. and used as raw materials. Bella frowned in confusion. Why go through all this trouble just to collect power? What are they even planning to use it for? Ariel asked her to think back to the earlier battle with the professor, pointing out how Varian's black flames had felt. Distinctly unnatural, that black flame, she explained, originated from the red crystal, essentially the finalized form of those experiments. But in truth, such catalysts wouldn't be limited to flames alone. If they were produced on a massive scale, there was no telling what they could be used for. As she spoke, the crack on the door began to slowly close. After hearing Ariel's analysis, Grace suspected that Varian had never intended to summon the Purger in the first place. Whether he hadn't tried, or simply couldn't, was impossible to say. What was clear now was that the space opening magical device had reached its operational limits. Whatever system they had built was already running on fumes. Bella glanced around at the surrounding apparatus. In her eyes, the entire setup was priceless. She had never seen spatial distortion magic with such precision and output. Ariel nodded. Slightly, you're right. Building a single one of these would drain an entire nation's budget, and yet there are 8 of them here. Only one organization came to mind. Bella guessed it must be the Discar Empire, but that assumption quickly fell apart. Even as one of the largest nations in the world, the Empire likely lacked the magical research capacity to construct even one of these devices. If it's not the Discar Empire, Bella mattered, then what country could afford something like this? Ariel answered calmly, there had to be an organization whose magical research far surpassed that of any empire. Grace spoke up. You mean the World Union Academy, right? I can't think of anyone else. The realization hit Bella hard. That can't be right, the World Union Academy. Ariel's response was firm. You're correct. This is the work of the World Union Academy. No other research institution could sustain this scale or budget, it seems. The Purge is far more closely tied to the Academy than we ever imagined. Bella, slow to process it all, finally voiced the thought out loud. You're saying the Academy has been manipulating everything from the shadows, but the World Union Academy is supposed to protect the world from threats. Ariel let out a quiet sigh. You're still too naive. I don't know why you refuse to believe it, but there's no other organization capable of this. Do you understand now? Gray offered a different perspective. That doesn't mean the entire Academy is our enemy. Most of its members are still on humanity's side. At least before my rebirth, the Academy's strongest forces were always those fighting on the front lines. They didn't hide behind others out of fear. They stood their ground and became the core force against the Purger, strong enough to surpass even the suppression squads. They protected civilians until the very end. After witnessing that future with my own eyes, I can't believe the Academy itself is humanity's enemy. Ariel nodded. You're right. Most people within the Academy are likely acting for humanity's sake, and they would never approve of experiments that waste lives so recklessly. However, the Academy has countless researchers. Each of them carries their own convictions, and with different ideals come different actions. Beyond that, there are facilities almost no one in this world truly understands. The Academy in its entirety. The person backing Varian clearly wields immense influence. With Varian's authority alone, orchestrating something like this would have been impossible. Bella voiced her concern. Even so, did that mean they couldn't fully trust the Academy? If that was the case, wouldn't they always be at a disadvantage? Ariel's gaze drifted into the past. I've observed the Academy from within for decades. One thing is certain. This is not an organization you can trust blindly. Most of its members probably believe they're working for humanity's future. Even the mastermind behind this plan likely convinced themselves of the same. But the truth is always buried in darkness, beyond anyone's reach. Graydon asked Ariel to search the area, hoping they might find something that could lead them to whoever was pulling the strings. Unfortunately, the facility contained no communication devices at all. Even the creator's residual magical signatures had been completely erased, leaving the site impeccably clean and nearly impossible to trace. And beyond that, there was still one more issue. Just as Ariel was about to continue, a massive explosion erupted behind Bella. The sudden blast caught Gray off guard, leaving him momentarily unsure of what had just happened. It quickly became clear that the explosions weren't aimed at them directly, but rather functioned as a destruction mechanism. Ariel grasped the situation instantly. It seems they even installed an evidence erasure system. They didn't detonate the site immediately. They likely intended to lure intruders in first, then trigger the destruction, and eliminate all witnesses at once. Watching Ariel analyze the situation, like a seasoned detective, Bella finally blurted out, "This isn't the time for deductions. We need to get out of here now." Ariel chuckles softly. "You're panicking way too much. Little one, these are just magical explosives." She suddenly pressed her palm against the ground. "Professors of the World Union Academy aren't so weak that we can't handle something like this." As she spoke, a golden glow spread across the floor. "If I could be killed by something like this, I wouldn't be worthy of teaching you." In the next instant, the golden light wrapped around all three of them. The glow intensified rapidly. With a sharp whoosh, the three vanished from spot, along with the 8 magical devices. 3 seconds later, on the lawn outside the building, Gray, Bella, and several survivors were teleported onto the open field by Ariel. Gray glanced at the survivors. Like them, everyone had escaped safely, though not without suffering. Bella finally let out a long breath. She had truly believed she was going to die, thanks to her professor's teleportation array. They were alive. Gray couldn't help but think how close that ordeal had been. Ariel laughed. "You'll get used to situations like this. After a few more times, we carried out more than I expected, so the teleport took longer. But it was worth it. We secured all 8 devices. Once we present these to the Academy, they won't be able to ignore us anymore." Not long after the group returned to the Academy, the professor seated across from them spoke first. "The survivors you brought back are currently receiving treatment at the Academy medical facility." The man before them was the headmaster of the World Union Academy. "Orodom Alexander, you have my thanks for stopping Varian's illegal experiments." He then picked up a report on the magical engines. "Each one of these devices is worth more than an entire nation's annual budget." Hearing this, Ariel's expression turned uneasy. "There are 8 devices in total. There's no way Varian gathered this level of firepower on his own. How did he obtain them? Was someone backing him?" Alexander slowly set the document down. His tone grave. "These devices were stolen goods. They were seized during transport. 78 personnel were escorting them, and every single one was killed." The revelation left all 3 of them stunned. None of them had expected this to be connected to a large-scale robbery. Ariel's gaze turned colder. "Talking about the incident from 15 years ago, aren't you?" Alexander nodded. "That's right. Those engines were part of the cargo that was hijacked back then, and the ones responsible were the Blood Wipers. You've heard of them, I assume." Gray had, of course. They were the largest criminal organization in the world. Parasites infesting every corner of society. No matter how many times they were crushed, they always resurfaced at that moment. Gray noticed something off about Bella's demeanor and glanced away. What he saw shocked him. The usually gentle Bella was wearing an expression of raw fury. "They're the ones who killed my parents." Alexander rubbed his temples. "That's exactly why. Even after being wiped out hundreds of times, they always come back. No one knows where they're hiding, and no one knows who their leader truly is." It's estimated that over 70% of crime-related deaths worldwide are tied to them. Even if their operatives have already infiltrated this academy, I wouldn't be surprised. The problem is we can't reliably identify them, and without certainty, the academy won't take action. Confused, Gray asked what that meant. If criminals were truly inside the academy, shouldn't they be exposed and removed? Ariel answered in his place, her tone calm but firm. That's how the academy operates now. Anyone with talent is given a chance to grow stronger, regardless of their background, race, or gender. That's the Academy's philosophy. Even if they're criminals, it doesn't automatically disqualify them. To Bella, the entire notion felt absurd. If someone was a criminal, shouldn't they be dealt with no matter what? Alexander actually agreed with her sentiment, but the upper echelons of the Academy clearly did not. Bella couldn't help but ask, did that mean even the headmaster wasn't considered part of the true leadership? Alexander gave an awkward smile. I'm just an executor of decisions. I wouldn't call myself part of the real upper ranks. Alexander spoke slowly. Though he was the Academy's public figurehead in name, the authority he actually wielded was laughably small. Do you want to know who truly controls everything? Gray and Bella nodded at the same time. They were just as curious about the one pulling the strings. From behind the scenes, Alexander, however, had no intention of telling them yet. Just keep getting stronger. The more power you have, the more you'll be allowed to know. Only when you possess enough strength will you be able to approach the Academy's core. By then, the truths you're seeking will reveal themselves. He couldn't name the person directly, but he offered a clue: you have a senior, someone whose influence is enough to steer the Academy's entire direction. Even the insane policy of accepting criminals was decided by him at last. Gray understood what Alexander meant. If they became stronger than that person, could they change the Academy itself? Alexander didn't elaborate further, simply nodding. That's more or less how it works in this academy. Strength is everything. Gray and Bella clenched their fists at the same time. Their resolve to grow stronger. Unmistakable Alexander took in the scene quietly. To him, it was still an unsolved riddle. Ariel could not have been involved in Varian schemes, which meant that between the remaining two, one had to be the true mastermind. It seemed Ariel's gods. I was as sharp as ever. The thought stirred a sense of anticipation in Alexander. He was eager to see what kind of monster Ariel would ultimately train. After leaving Alexander's office, Gray walked alone through the academy corridors. He glanced down at the black mark on the back of his hand in this academy. It was clear only power could command everything, whether it was overthrowing the purge or exposing the truth behind the scenes. For now, there was only one priority: becoming stronger. Just then, a sudden sound snapped him out of his thoughts. Ray looked up and saw a foot whipping straight toward his face. With a heavy impact, he blocked the attack in time. Though his body was still driven backward, the attacker's strength was overwhelming. Even after stopping the strike, Gray continued to slide back under the force. The sheer power behind that kick was staggering, leaving Gray puzzled. Why had this person attacked him out of nowhere? If the attacker couldn't offer a reasonable explanation, Gray would treat it as a deliberate provocation, and he wouldn't hold back. The student finally spoke coldly, declaring that Gray had no right to stand in that corridor. His reasoning was flimsy at best. "For gods, I special admit, like you doesn't belong here." Gray slowly drew his sword. It seemed he had run into yet another person who despised special admits. Only this time, it was the first time he'd been ambushed in a hallway. Just as Gray prepared to strike back, the man showed a hint of regret, saying he would have gladly fought if the rejecta hadn't already appeared. Gray turned around and saw Ariel approaching at an unhurried pace. He cast a puzzled glance at the student, unable to tell what was really going through the man's head after leaving the corridor. The man's thoughts became active. The surveillance was too tight, and he could no longer get close. Still, he would send others as soon as possible. His mental state suggested he was communicating with someone. In secret, who exactly? Only he himself knew. When Ariel arrived, she asked Gray what had just happened. Gray admitted he was confused as well. A student had suddenly kicked him and claimed that someone who entered through the gauntlet program had no right to walk freely within the academy. Ariel assessed the situation carefully. No weapons had been used. There was no verbal confrontation, and Gray wasn't injured, which meant she had no formal grounds to intervene. She then pointed in the direction the student had left, a teasing tone in her voice. "Then why didn't you chase him down and knock his lights out?" The question caught Gray off guard. "We're classmates, isn't that going too far?" Ariel let out a quiet sigh. "As your professor, I can't officially approve of that. But if something happened nearby, I might not notice." Hearing the indulgence in her words, Gray decided to let it go. He didn't want to stir up more trouble. There was something Ariel didn't know, and she couldn't help but ask. "Our gods, I special admits. Really that unwelcome?" Gray nodded. "People sometimes mock us. This is just the first time it turned physical." Ariel asked again to be sure. "So they really do ridicule you openly?" A hint of guilt appeared on her face. "I'm sorry. If only I had more authority within the academy." Gray told her not to blame herself. "Without you, I wouldn't have even made it through the front gate. Besides, Bella and the others will prove that the God's Eye project isn't a mistake. Professor, your judgment has always been exceptional." Gray recalled those people from his past life. Without exception, they had been the core force against the purger. Ariel paused when she heard him, and she smiled faintly and nodded. "Thank you for supporting me." But Ariel didn't want Gray to treat it like it was someone else's problem. Among everyone in the God's Eye group, Gray was the one she placed the highest hopes on. Ariel said Eli Cub and the earlier special admits would all become top-tier talents. For the first time, she truly believed someone could surpass humanity itself was when she met Gray. Gray hadn't expected Ariel to rate him that highly, placing him alongside those future powerhouses. Still, Gray quickly rejected the hesitation. In his own thoughts, he saw it as weakness. The mastermind behind Varian might not have given up on summoning the purger, so Gray couldn't afford to relax. That was an existence that could erase every elite with a single blow. And the reason Gray had returned to this timeline was to make sure the purger could be defeated and to seize control of the world with his own hands. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Today's lesson was a live combat drill in swordsmanship. The instructor paired students by name. Once 2 names were matched, they became a pair. The moment Gray heard, it was practical combat. He locked in. He had to take this seriously. If Gray messed up, people would start trashing God's Eye. Special admits again, at the very least. He had to prove he could keep up with regular students. And right then, something that made him want to psyche out up again. His little nemesis, you could say. On the board, the instructor wrote 2 names. Gray and Leon Hart. Leon Hart was the course ace. The strongest first year, the instructor said slowly. I try to match students with similar strength. Don't hold back, treat this like a real fight. Gray cursed the instructor 1,000 times in his head. Similar strength. He'd barely gotten in through special admission. How was he supposed to face the ace? And Leon Hart already hated God's Eye students. After what happened last time, he was probably itching to beat Gray into the ground. Just then Leon Hart moved behind Gray. Gray watched closely, wanting to see what kind of stunt he was about to pull. What surprised Gray was that Leon Hart came over and greeted him, "Hey, hi." Gray's expression shifted. He couldn't tell what Leon Hart was up to. Leon Hart looked thrilled. "Looks like we're partners. I'm seriously happy about this." But inside, Leon Hart was thinking, getting the top spot was worth it. If it meant he could finally cross swords with Gray. He trained harder than anyone now. He wanted Gray to witness his true swordsmanship. Those words made Gray feel awkward, just as he'd suspected. Leon Hart really did seem like he was here for payback. It was hard not to doubt it. Leon Hart's smile was way too deliberate. He was clearly excited that he finally had a legal chance to hit Gray. At the instructor's command, the class split into 2 teams and took positions. At the center, the duel began. Everyone fought to defeat their opponent. This was a perfect chance to show off, and nobody wanted to miss it. At the same time, Leon Hart moved in a flash. Grinning as he spoke, "Gray, you'd better watch out, my attack is coming." With a loud crash, Gray's blade collided head-on with Leon Hart's sword. Gray felt a flicker of shock. No wonder Leon Hart was the top swordsman of the year. His attacks weren't perfect, but they were dangerously close. In the next instant, Leon Hart struck and sent Gray flying backward. Leon Hart's body flowed with his blade, moving as if guided by the sword itself. At this moment, he was almost one with his weapon, stepping into a true sword-body unity. Every strike razor sharp. Leon Hart spoke with excitement. "Lord Gray, you're incredible. I can't believe you didn't enter through regular." Admission, the comment irritated Gray. If Leon Hart had time to talk, he should have focused on fighting. Their blades clashed dozens of times in an instant, sparks cutting through the air. Both were blindingly fast. Yet Gray remained on the defensive. No matter how he pushed his speed, he couldn't shake Leon Hart. Still, that was within Gray's expectations. He had thought he'd be crushed instantly, yet he was somehow holding on. Even so, even with both arms, he couldn't match Leon Hart's raw power. Leon Hart's swordsmanship was simply insane. His orthodox, textbook perfect, composed style had been refined to a terrifying level, even with memories from his past life and the Sword Saint's training. Gray wasn't confident he could truly defeat him. In a flash, Leon Hart closed the distance. Gray brought his sword down, only to feel how overwhelmingly heavy Leon Hart's blade was, and his own stamina was clearly running out. Leon Hart laughed loudly. "I can fight like this all day." Without the Sword Saint's special training, Gray knew he would have been knocked down long ago. Worse still, Leon Hart's breathing hadn't even grown ragged. It looked as though this fight barely taxed him at all. Gray quickly realized his stamina was about to fail. He had to end this now. The professor's earlier words suddenly echoed in his mind. Treat this duel as a real battle. As Gray turned those words over in his head, a solution finally took shape. At the same time, Leon Hart's sword came, crashing down again at the instant of strike. Gray ducked low, his wrist twisted sharply. Leon Hart's eyes widened in surprise, clearly not expecting that response. With a dull thud, Gray kicked Leon Hart's ankle. To Leon Hart's shock, his body was sent flying into the air. As Leon Hart lost his balance, Gray seized the moment to counterattack. Leon Hart finally understood. This duel had become a true fight to the death. Even so, he knew he could not afford to lose. In the next heartbeat, Gray's sword stopped at Leon Hart's throat, while Leon Hart's blade rested just as precisely against Gray's neck. The distance between them was razor thin. One step closer and both would have died. Gray reached out to help Leon Hart up, ready to call the match a draw. But Leon Hart clearly didn't see it as a simple tie. In that situation, all Leon Hart had done was swing his sword. Gray, however, was different. If he had wanted to, he could have pierced Leon Hart's heart. Leon Hart spoke calmly. "This was only a simulation. That's why you forced yourself to stop. You blade at my neck, right?" Gray chuckled, even with all those protective runes. Pointing a sword at someone's heart in a mock duel feels a bit excessive. Leon Hart seemed to let it go. "Then that means I lost, Lord Gray. You're truly strong," with a smile. Leon Hart turned and walked away. Thanks to you, I finally understand the difference between real combat and fencing practice. And that battle isn't just about swordsmanship. Gray told him not to take it so seriously. From a class perspective, what he'd done could almost be considered cheating. Leon Hart didn't seem to listen. The instructor had said to treat training as real combat, and in real combat, cheating doesn't exist. Even as he spoke, his footsteps slowed and came to a stop. Lord Gray, how about another round? His face was faintly flushed as he said it. Gray felt utterly speechless. They had just finished, and his stamina hadn't even recovered yet. He knew full well that his win had come from catching Leon Hart off guard head-on. He stood no chance this wasn't about technique anymore. Leon Hart's endurance completely overwhelmed his own. At that moment, someone suddenly stepped forward and shouted for them. Stop! He declared that whether it was combat training or not, this was still a swordsmanship class, and no one was allowed to use anything beyond sword techniques, and someone like you, a trash special admit, has no business being paired with top students. Don't get cocky just because you know a little magic. Got it? Gray hadn't expected the blame to be dumped entirely on him, especially since he hadn't decided the pairing. Fortunately, Leon Hart stepped in to defend him. The professor decided it. Gray is the only one qualified to fight me. Mind your own business. The instructor was drawn over by the argument and confirmed it outright. The pairing had been his decision, and he had said he would match students of similar strengths. He stated clearly that Gray was the only one capable of facing Leon Hart. Head-on, Leon Hart nodded in satisfaction. The instructor's judgment was spot on. Seeing the other students still dissatisfied, the instructor added, if you're that unhappy, step up yourself, be Gray, and you can challenge Leon Hart. The student's face lit up with excitement. That was exactly what he wanted. He bragged that he had entered the academy by defeating an examiner and shouldn't be lumped together with barely passing students or those who failed outright. Unbeknownst to him, Leon Hart sneered inwardly, judging Lord Gray by admission status alone, without understanding his true strength, reminded Leon Hart of his past self. And people like that usually end up regretting it. Leon saw this as a perfect opportunity. Gray's strength could finally be acknowledged by everyone through this fight. Leon shot an angry glare at the student ahead, practically wanting to tear him apart. He had barely gotten a chance to spar one-on-one with Lord Gray, only for it to be interrupted. A chill ran down the student's spine as he looked up, meeting Leon's furious expression head-on. Leon thought coldly, just for interrupting this. You deserve to die now. The student was confused. He couldn't understand why Leon was angry at him. Wasn't Leon always the one who opposed special admits? The instructor turned to Gray and asked whether he was willing to accept the challenge. Gray didn't know how strong his opponent truly was, but if the student had entered through regular exams, this wouldn't be an easy match. At the very least, his opponent's stamina and strength were certainly superior. Even the Sword Saint's brutal training couldn't fully compensate for years of structured nutrition and physical conditioning. Gray wasn't overly confident in his technique, but he doubted that losing would get him expelled. The instructor nodded, you won't be expelled if you lose. This is just a practice class. But don't hold back. Gray accepted the challenge, raising his sword and settling into a combat stance. As the match began, the student rushed toward Gray at astonishing speed. He shouted arrogantly that it was time for special admits to learn their place and understand their role. The next instant, their swords collided head-on. What surprised Gray was that the impact wasn't heavy at all. With a slight exertion of force, he sent the student flying backward. The student froze in shock, clearly not expecting to be overpowered. Gray remained serious. The opponent's strength wasn't remarkable. He was likely holding something back. Without a powerful trump card, that level of arrogance wouldn't make sense. Unexpectedly, Gray's casual follow-up strike actually drew blood. The student was knocked straight back once more. Gray hurried over asking if he was okay, explaining that he had aimed for the sword, but accidentally struck his face, assuming he would dodge moments later. The student struggled to his feet and picked up his sword again. Crying, he shouted for another round, insisting that Gray had only caught him off guard. Even the instructor looked exasperated. If you insist on getting beaten, then fight until you're satisfied. I'm not stopping this anymore. The second round began, and the student charged again. 1 minute later, Gray looked at him awkwardly and asked whether he was still okay. By then, the student's head was covered in swollen bumps. Even the professors couldn't watch anymore, and immediately ordered someone to take him to the infirmary. After he was taken away, the instructor announced that this year's first-year representatives would be Gray and Leon, asking if anyone objected. Gray was confused. He didn't quite understand what representative meant. The instructor explained that in a few days, the top first years, would challenge the second-year champion. It would be a friendly match, with restraint on both sides. He added that first years had lost 35 consecutive matches, without a single win, but this year might be different. With Gray and Leon both swordsmanship prodigies, they might finally turn the tide. The teacher's words shocked him. 35 consecutive defeats was the gap between first years and second years. Really, that overwhelming, the teacher nodded. In the academy, a single year made all the difference. Losing was the norm, even expected. If a first year could put up a decent fight, that alone was impressive. A victory, however, would be recorded as a miracle in academy history. Simply being chosen to fight was already an honor. With that, the teacher left, telling them not to be nervous and to simply enjoy the match. Stroking his chin, he pondered the teacher's calm demeanor. Perhaps intergrade battles were not as grim as he had imagined. Still, as a god, I special admit, this was the perfect chance to prove he was truly capable of fighting. Training was no longer optional. Elsewhere, the academy's professors gathered for what would be their final meeting, centered on a proposal submitted by Budra. Budra proposed expelling Amy White. A god's I special admit. The motion came directly from the magic department. Professor himself, Ariel, immediately objected. She questioned why such a proposal was even raised, stating that God's Eye students fell under her authority. Buddha replied that this was precisely the issue. Amy White had failed the third-year promotion exam, yet remained only because of his special status. Every other student who failed had been expelled. In anyone's eyes, that was hardly fair. Ariel refused to argue further. She reiterated what she had already made clear. Amy was steadily approaching world-class combat capability. His current backlash prevented him from using his full strength. Otherwise, he would have passed long ago. She added firmly that her students were hers to manage, not something others could decide for her. Another professor sneered, dismissing talk of backlash and hidden talent as nothing more than excuses for a useless student. How long did she plan to keep selling that fantasy? Ariel sensed danger immediately. This had clearly been prepared in advance. Amy's strength was real, and so was the backlash. But he could master that power at any time, tomorrow or the day after. If forced too early, that chance could be lost forever. The professors were unimpressed. They had heard the same excuses before. Was her plan to keep an unqualified student in the academy? Indefinitely, what they failed to see was that Ariel acted for the academy's sake. She sought to cultivate true geniuses, not discard them, simply for failing to fit a rigid system. A heavy-set professor mocked her, saying that perhaps past special admits had been remarkable, but this generation was nothing but failures. An elderly professor chuckled, naming Jacob, Field, Amy White, and Bella as all being thoroughly mediocre. Perhaps the great gods I had lost its sharpness. It might be time to abolish the program altogether. Sweat beaded on Ariel's forehead. Abolish it, that was unthinkable. Someone reminded her that the program had been established by the Founders Council, and that with a majority vote, it could just as easily be dissolved. Had she forgotten, another voice stated bluntly that the current God's Eye students simply failed to impress. Bella might have shown improvement, but it was hardly significant, especially given how questionable her mana capacity remained. Ariel tried to respond, only to be drowned out once more. The professors spoke as if in unison, relentlessly criticizing the God's Eye students. Ariel understood now this was a coordinated move, aimed at dismantling the God's Eye special admit system. At that moment, she realized how little authority she still held. In that room, many professors ultimately cared only about whether the project benefited the academy. If Ariel wanted them on her side, she couldn't say anything that would push them further against her. Buddha spoke like a man who already held victory in his hands, sneering as he asked if she had suddenly gone silent. At the very least, she should admit that her prime was long past. Several professors beside him echoed the sentiment, saying that, while she might have once achieved greatness, perhaps she should retire before completely ruining her reputation. Ariel stood firm. She still believed she could recognize true talent. Those students needed time to grow, and given enough time, they would prove themselves. All she needed was to ensure that the God's Eye students were not expelled. Before that day came, as long as her students remained, she was willing to pay any price. At that moment, one professor spoke up, mentioning a student named Gray, who showed exceptional promise in swordsmanship. If that was the case, why not have him participate in an intergrade battle? Buddha's lips curled into a sinister smile. If so, there was nothing left to discuss. Gray had a fight if Gray could prove himself. Through swordsmanship then, The outcome could be used to determine the future of the Godzilla program. Hearing this, Ariel instinctively turned her gaze toward the Sword Saint. Beside her, the Sword Saint gently shook her head, signaling that Gray must not be sent into battle. Ariel immediately rejected the proposal. She stated that Gray's power was ill-suited for mock combat. In real life and death battles, however, it might be a different story. In the next instant, a professor slammed his hand down on the table. He glared at Ariel and accused her of making excuses yet again. If that was the case, then the God's Eye program should be abolished outright. Ariel was visibly shaken. She insisted that they didn't understand. Gray's ability was far beyond ordinary sword techniques. A suffocating tension filled the entire conference room. In the end, the headmaster moved to conclude the meeting, deciding that the God's Eye students would participate in the grade battle, after which the future plan would be determined based on their performance. Ariel's heart sank. This was the outcome she least wanted. Buddha spoke as if his scheme had succeeded, saying he was now looking forward to the match. With that, the meeting ended. Before leaving, the Sword Saint cast Ariel along, heavy glance filled with concern. Ariel remained seated alone, unmoving. She knew better than anyone that Gray's true power could not be fully displayed in mock battles, but his standing within the academy was simply too low. Even so, with no other choice left, she still hoped Gray could achieve something. In the Intergrade match, Ariel was on the verge of breaking down. If Gray failed to prove himself, the God's Eye program might truly be abolished, and every God's Eye student would be expelled. She could only place her hopes on Gray. The day of the Intergrade battle finally arrived. All students gathered to witness the confrontation between first years and second years. The first contestant to be introduced was the first year's top swordsman, Lei Hart. His opponent was the second year's top student Harmek. Next, the first year challenger was introduced, Gray. The opponent he would face was Diaper. The moment Gray saw him, recognition struck. This was the same man who had ambushed him in the corridor. Was he really about to face him head on? Several rows of professors now filled the stands, all eyes fixed on the upcoming battle. Buddha watched Gray with open disdain, determined to see what kind of strength this special admit truly possessed. Leon asked his opponent whether Intergrade matches were always observed. By so many professors, the answer was no. This was unprecedented last year. Only 3 fencing professors had bothered to attend. Herman was equally puzzled by the unusually large turnout. Suddenly something clicked for the sharp-minded Leon. With a confident grin, he declared that the professors must be curious about Gray. Their taste, he said, was impeccable. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. While Harman beside him could only stare in disbelief. Was the first-year ace really admiring that special admit? From the stands, Buddha actually responded, confirming Leon's guess. They were here to witness the final battle of a God's Eye. Special admit Gray couldn't understand what final was supposed to mean. Hearing his question, Buddha turned to Ariel and asked if she hadn't told him yet. Then with a mocking smile, he told Gray that the God's Eye special admit program was about to be abolished by the academy. Gray was completely stunned. He looked to Ariel and asked if it was true. Ariel lowered her head in silence. Her lack of response was answer enough. She hadn't told him earlier because she was worried. If Gray knew the truth, she was certain he would use that power, and in his current state, that would be no different from suicide. Forcing a faint smile, she tried to reassure him, saying that Boudreaux was only trying to distract him. He should ignore it and focus on the fight. Even so, Gray noticed her hands trembling ever so slightly. He slowly closed his eyes and spoke calmly, since the professor had already said as much. Buddhists snorted from the side, saying they were free to go ahead and make fools of themselves. In his eyes, once Gray suffered a pitiful defeat, the other professors would finally realize that Ariel and the God's Eye had lost their former edge. Ray then finished what he had left unsaid. Since the professor had spoken, he couldn't simply stand by. Buddha's expression finally showed a hint of surprise. Ray stated clearly that he didn't care if he himself was humiliated, but he would never allow anyone to question Professor Ariel's judgment. Ariel looked equally shocked. She hadn't expected Gray to say something like that. In public, Boudreaux pointed at Gray and sneered, saying he couldn't see what power Ariel had supposedly sensed in him. Unlike her, most of the professors who hadn't gone senile were convinced Gray would lose miserably. Instead of anger, Gray felt a spark of excitement. If that was the case, then he would prove Boudreaux wrong. Boudreaux was so furious, he nearly stormed down from the stands. But the professors beside him quickly restrained him. Ariel slowly lowered her head, unease stirring within her. At that moment, the referee announced for the contestants to split into groups and assemble with their teammates. Ariel was deeply worried. If Gray were facing an ordinary top student, she might have felt some relief. His practical swordsmanship might have given him a slim chance to survive. But what truly frightened her was the opponent he was about to face. Diver had undergone surgical modification of his brain, boosting his reaction speed to an almost inhuman level. He was practically a living weapon for Gray, who relied on ambush tactics. This made Diver the worst possible opponent, and all of it traced back to that madman. She silently prayed that Gray would not use that power. Even if he lost, he must not use it. To ease his mind, Ariel spoke gently, telling Gray to fight well and not to worry about her. Above all, not to force himself. Gray gave a light laugh and replied that he understood. She didn't need to worry soon after. The showdown between the top students began, with both representatives stepping onto the arena. The referee explained that protective magic had been deployed across the arena. Once lethal damage was detected, the protection mechanism would activate and determine the victor. The contestants were instructed to fight, as if it were real combat. Both fighters were confident they could take the other down. As a result, this clash between the Academy's elite students drew immense attention the moment the match began. Leon Hart closed the distance at once. Harmank responded with fiery enthusiasm. Good. Your burst speed is impressive. Let me see what you've got. Two sharp sounds cut through the air as their movements blurred, blades ringing in rapid succession. When they reappeared, the fight had already turned ferocious. At that instant, Harmank stomped forward, his gaze completely different from before. Feeling intense, surged as his sword slashed toward Leon Hart's vitals. Leon Hart ducked low to evade, and a familiar sequence followed when he braced one arm against the ground. Then he kicked out without hesitation, but the motion lacked fluidity, giving Harmank time to evade. Leon Hart let out a sigh. He couldn't fight the way Gray did. Harmank, however, praised him openly, saying Leon Hart was impressive, far stronger than he himself had been as a first year. Excited, Harmank suggested picking up the pace, curious whether Leon Hart could keep up. Leon Hart reacted quickly, but he remained completely suppressed. Before long, he was forced back against the barrier. Harmank seized the moment and slashed straight toward his neck. The protection magic activated instantly, signaling Leon Hart's defeat. Both fighters withdrew their swords. Next came a second match as Leon Hart brushed past. He wished Gray good luck. Gray thanked him silently. He had already made bold claims, and now he had to back them up. Before time had ever rewound, Gray had slain countless monsters of despair. Compared to that, his odds here were not hopeless. Nearby, a sword scraped against the ground. As someone approached him, the man muttered coldly, that Professor Budra could wait in hell. He would send Gray there soon enough. It became clear that this grim opponent intended a true life and death battle. Gray's Intergrade duel against the second year. Diver officially began at the opening bell. Gray charged forward without hesitation. To his surprise, his lightning-fast strike was caught head-on. Diver countered casually, knocking Gray flying. The sheer strength behind it stunned him. Even now, Gray's arm trembled from the impact. Ariel had warned him about Diver's enhanced reaction speed, but Gray hadn't expected such overwhelming power. As well, the gap was enormous. No tricks would bridge it. He still had one final trump card, but it would damage him severely. Ariel had warned him never to use that power. If he did, death was a real possibility. Gray had promised her Ariel understood the stakes, but she never wanted Gray to gamble with his life. Worse still, even the arena's barrier might not withstand that power. It could kill the opponent outright. Torn between victory and restraint, Gray hesitated just then. Diver rushed in at terrifying speed. Gray had no choice but to adapt on the fly. He raised his sword and barely blocked another strike. With a sharp flick of a wrist, Diver unleashed another seamless attack. The moves themselves were simple, but with Diver's physique and reflexes, defeating Gray should have been easy. Diver wasn't lacking skill. He was deliberately holding back. Suddenly, Diver flashed a sinister smile. Gray felt a chill run down his spine. Diver's attack smashed through his defense. The next strike was aimed straight at Gray's eyes. Escape seemed impossible, yet Gray blocked it, leaving him stunned. Why had Diver slowed down at that moment? Gray forced Diver back, his mind racing. There was no way he should have blocked that attack. In time, the realization unsettled him. Diver could have ended the fight, but chose not to from his stance. Ariel instantly sensed something was wrong. Diver's overall attributes were abnormally high. Without a second thought, she activated God's eye in her vision. A mass of violet flames burned within Diver's heart, and even Ariel couldn't identify what kind of power it was. One thing, however, was certain: that flame was extremely dangerous. Several professors nearby sneered. The match had already become one-sided. Was her precious student still refusing to surrender? They went on to mock the second-year students, remarking on their nasty temperament. They could clearly end the fight at any moment, yet deliberately dragged it out. An unpleasant sort of amusement. The God's Eye student was already struggling just to block the attacks, yet still refused to concede. Didn't that alone prove his lack of strength? Professor Budra watched with open amusement. He even suggested that perhaps Gray already knew the Godzilla program was about to be abolished and was stalling on purpose, sending a message that if things continued like this, the entire special emission system would spiral out of control. Another professor quickly echoed the sentiment, praising Gray as a remarkably considerate student who truly cared about the academy. At that moment, Ariel cut them off sharply. She demanded that the fight be stopped at once. It was too dangerous. Budra looked puzzled and asked what danger she was referring to. Was she talking about this simulated battle? One professor assumed Ariel simply didn't know, and calmly explained that the arena was protected by powerful defensive spells. Any attack capable of causing fatal harm would be automatically blocked. That protection took the form of an almost invisible blue barrier, which was precisely why students could fight without fear. Unless there was another reason. Ariel demanded that the fight be stopped immediately. She understood that well enough, but it still wasn't enough to protect Gray. The moment her words fell, a terrifying surge of energy erupted from Diver. Black miasma spilled outward, spreading even toward the stance. A chill ran through Ariel. Her sense of dread intensified. Something was clearly wrong with him. Diver wasn't just fighting. He intended to kill Gray. Diver assumed an opening stance, dark energy coiling around his blade. With a thunder's crack, he swung without hesitation, sending a blade wave tearing straight ahead. Gray felt his heart seize. This power was far beyond anything he could confront. Head on the sword, light shot skyward as a massive explosion rocked the entire arena. Moments later, Gray swallowed hard. The sheer force was overwhelming. A deep gash split the arena in two. Had he reacted any slower, he would have been cleaved apart. What shocked him even more was that the defensive array had been cut open. His magical protection was completely useless. Fortunately, Diver hadn't shattered the final barrier. Otherwise, even Buddha might have been killed. Seizing the moment, Ariel tried to forcefully halt the match. She had warned them. The barrier couldn't withstand Diver's attacks. She raised her hand and unleashed magic, fury burning in her eyes that damned Bradley. Implanting something like this into a student, Ariel attempted to break the defensive formation and enter the arena to restrain Diver herself. But her power wasn't enough to breach the barrier, leaving her unable to deploy binding magic. Left with no choice, she shouted to those behind her that this was an emergency. The barrier had to be lifted and the match canceled. Otherwise, people would die. The professors were already paralyzed by fear. Unable to respond, it was a grim preview of why they would be the first to flee when humanity faced true catastrophe. Ariel looked back at the battlefield. Stopping the fight from the outside would take far too long, and she didn't know if Gray could endure. She signaled for him to retreat and stall for time. Gray wanted to run, but only if he could actually escape. In the next instant, Diver attacked again, clinging to Gray like a shadow. Turning his back even once would mean instant death. The sheer force of that strike sent waves of fear through the watching students. The Sword Saint observed in silence. He knew the professor's spells would take at least 30 seconds to reach the arena. And in a battle like this, that was far too long. They had no real choice left. It might still be early, but the Sword Saint believed Gray would pull it off. Back on the battlefield, Gray kept shifting his position, narrowly avoiding Diver's attacks. The Sword Saint rose to his feet and shouted for Gray to imagine his body as a blade. Stop swinging the sword and use that power to move himself instead. Gray heard every word. The problem was that Diver left him no breathing room. Even so, Gray trusted that the Sword Saint wouldn't lead him astray. He immediately widened the distance between himself and Diver. Let's see if this works. Gray drilled the thought into his mind. He was a lone blade, focusing every ounce of strength into a single point. He no longer cared about the attacks in front of him. He forced the idea deeper and deeper. I am the Sword Diver strike, closed in. Yet Gray didn't move an inch. With a deafening crash, Diver's attack slammed into the defensive barrier. Once more at the same time, shock spread across Diver's face. Ray had somehow appeared behind him, his entire body wrapped in a terrifying surge of power. Diver was shaken. How could Gray's speed have increased this drastically? In an instant, in the next moment, Gray unleashed his counterattack without hesitation. Just as expected, protective magic flared across Diver's body as Gray poured more power into his blade. Diver's protection device began to crack apart. Then Diver was sent flying backward. The strike had avoided his vitals, but that no longer mattered. Protection had been broken. Gray had already won. The impact blasted a massive crater. Into the arena floor, Buddha stood frozen in terror. He never imagined Gray's attack could shatter the defensive barrier. What kind of fight was this? The Sword Saint quickly warned the referee to check on the other student. That strike shouldn't have hit anything vital. The referee hurriedly called for the medical team. But in the next instant, a massive hand crawled out from the crater, shrouded in black energy. The Sword Saint's expression darkened. This one really is wrong. Black energy surged violently around Dipper's body, his hair standing on end. He threw his head back and roared at the sky, a clear sign that he had completely lost his sanity. Ariel immediately warned Gray the fight wasn't over yet, and he had to stay on guard. But a chill ran down Gray's spine. Every instinct screamed the same warning run. Waves of black energy rushed toward him. They carried not only overwhelming pressure, but real destructive force, forcing Gray to retreat again and again. To keep his distance from Gray's perspective, the speed of those attacks still wasn't enough to land a clean hit. Yet the arena platform itself was already being torn apart by the black energy. Professor Budra stood frozen in shock as chaos erupted behind him, people fleeing in every direction. At the same time, several mages from the magic division arrived and began dismantling the barrier. But it would take at least 10 seconds. 10 seconds on the battlefield felt unbearably long, long enough to decide life or death. Gray had only one goal now: survive those 10 seconds and wait for rescue. But facing a completely unhinged opponent, that hope seemed slim. Diver was truly trying to kill him. Diver's figure blurred, and in an instant, he was right in front of Gray, so fast it barely registered. Gray barely managed to raise his sword and block the attack. The sheer power and speed sent a shiver through him. This wasn't something a human body could produce. Diver was beyond abnormal. And yet Gray realized with bitter clarity that he himself was no longer normal either. In the next moment, their movements mirrored each other as both figures vanished from their positions. When Gray reappeared, he was already behind a bar, his attack fully charged. The same killing intent burned in Gray's eyes. Since his opponent truly meant to kill him, there was no reason to hold back anymore. No matter how fast Iber's reactions were, they still looked slow in Gray's eyes. Then, without warning, Gray spat out a mouthful of blood. The mysterious power inside him was clearly pushing his body past its limits. Outside the arena, Ariel was frantic, shouting for Gray to retreat immediately and stop fighting, but she didn't know that. Turning his back now meant certain death. Diper's power had surpassed all expectations. Gray's only option was to strike back. In that instant, Gray poured every ounce of mysterious power he could draw into his sword if this was a fight to the death. Then he would see it through. Still, it wasn't enough. He needed more power after a brief moment. Gray felt the energy fully converge. This was his moment. The hunt had begun. With a sickening rip, 2 severed arms flew into the air. Dipper's body was sent flying backward. His arms had been completely cut off. Gray hadn't gone for the head on purpose. He wanted answers. What kind of surgery had turned Diber into something like this? Diver's pupils went blank. After a single scream, he lost consciousness. Aside from sparing his life, Gray had shown absolutely no mercy. With a heavy thud, Diver collapsed to his knees, black energy still pouring from his severed arms. Ariel stood frozen in shock, as did the 2 magic professors behind her. Gray had actually defeated him. By the time the fight ended, the entire arena platform had been reduced to rubble. At the same moment, the barrier was finally lifted, and a large group of instructors rushed in, led by Ariel without a word. Ariel immediately bound the student in restraints, completely unconcerned with how severe his injuries were. Gray shakily forced himself to his feet, thinking the battle was finally over. But in the very next moment, a wave of discomfort surged through his body. Blood erupted from all sides at once. Wounds he had taken during the fight, forcibly suppressed until now, finally bursting open. The sight nearly scared Ariel out of her mind. "You can't die on me, Gray." She converted every last drop of her magic into healing magic and poured it into his injuries. At the same time, 3 professors rushed in from behind. Seeing them, Ariel immediately urged them to help and cast healing spells on Gray as well. Soon Gray felt a warm current envelop his entire body, and his eyes slowly opened. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The status of gods, I special admit, was finally secured when Gray regained consciousness. Ariel let out a breath. She hadn't realized she was holding, but in the next second she froze. She never expected Gray to stand up immediately. The 2 professors stared at him in disbelief. "Are you sure you're really fine?" He stood up way too fast. Gray turned to Ariel and asked her to examine him with a god's eye. Ariel slowly removed her glasses, blue light flaring from her left pupil. Yet, as she analyzed Gray's condition, shock overtook her expression. She could hardly believe it. After exerting that much power, his soul didn't even bear the slightest scratch. As for his body, it had already been fully restored by healing magic. There shouldn't be any pain left at all. The Sword Saint chuckled from the side. "Looks like it worked. We successfully reduced the backlash." Everything had unfolded exactly as Gray had anticipated. Ariel snapped back angrily. "You call this reducing backlash, when the buffering was cut?" Confused by her tone, the Sword Saint glanced over, sensing something was off. And there was Ariel, bristling with fury without defensive magic. He would have been dead. The Sword Saint gestured for her to calm down. "We managed to keep his injuries within the limits that healing magic can handle. Given the circumstances, this is already a good outcome." Regardless, the Sword Saint hoped that one day, Gray would be able to bear the backlash on his own, though that would take time. Only then did Gray truly understand that the brutal training from before had all been leading to this moment. Many things had gone off plan, but the result was still acceptable. Ariel then glanced at Diver, now reduced to a human stump by Gray, and said coldly, "That man's killing intent was far too strong." She turned to the professors beside her. "Go ahead and confirm the result of this match." Her voice was calm, yet absolute. "If you aren't blind, you should have already noticed that Diver's magical defenses were forcibly triggered by my attack. Therefore, the winner is the first-year student Gray." The stands erupted at once. A first year defeating a second-year prodigy was unheard of. Deafening cheers followed. "Lord Gray is incredible, so all gods, I special admits, really are monsters." This single battle also put an end to the first year's 35-match losing streak. To be honest, the Sword Saint no longer cared about that record. After witnessing this duel, who could possibly claim that Ariel's judgment, guided by the gods, I was wrong? The dean chuckled, softly faced with this scene. "We have no choice but to acknowledge him. From this day on, no one will support abolishing the gods. I special admission, Slot," he continued. "In fact, we should feel ashamed for ever considering it. We nearly expelled a student of such extraordinary talent." Ariel did not join the professor's discussion, choosing instead to stand quietly off to the side. Her body trembled slightly from excitement. "Gray truly gave me a huge surprise today." A smile appeared on her face. An emotion even welled up in her eyes. A bald professor spoke up honestly. "Those who push for abolishing the gods I program should be the ones reflecting on their responsibility." As soon as he said that, everyone's gaze shifted toward Budra and the others. Cold sweat poured down their foreheads, leaving them completely speechless. Soon after, they hurriedly made excuses and slipped away in embarrassment. Watching their retreating figures, laughter spread through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Never oppose a god." Looks like that old saying still holds true. Still, compared to before, things have grown much gentler. Times have changed. Ariel was still arguing with the Sword Saint, but he clearly had no intention of engaging, because he knew he wouldn't win. Unnoticed by her, Gray was quietly watching Ariel, a question forming in his mind. Had something happened in the professor's past? Just then the dean's voice sounded from behind Gray. "Now that the interference is gone, let's discuss a few matters that concern me." Gray felt curious, unsure what the dean could possibly want from him. In the next instant, however, he caught a hint from the dean's gaze. It was likely about that mysterious power within him. Instead of saying it outright, Gray asked what the dean wished to speak with him about. The dean said solemnly during the match, "We clearly detected that the second-year student Diver had been forcibly injected with a form of unnatural power. The Academy will conduct a full investigation. After all, a simulation battle that should have been completely safe nearly put a student's life at risk." With that, the dean offered Gray a formal apology, admitting that the Academy bore full responsibility for failing to detect the anomaly in advance. This was precisely why he had come to apologize. Gray let out a light chuckle, relieved that the Dean wasn't asking about that power. Itself, there's no need to worry. Dean, in the end, no real damage was done. The Dean adjusted his glasses. Thank you for your understanding. Then his tone shifted that said, after Diver went berserk, did you also release some kind of mysterious power? Gray sighed inwardly. So the Academy played the same game. After all, courtesy first, pressure second. This was exactly what he'd been worried about. Keeping his expression calm, he replied, Dean, that didn't seem to be magic. It felt like something far more bizarre. A type of power that modern, magical theory can't even begin to analyze. The Dean clearly took interest and asked why Gray would study such a power. Gray slowly closed his eyes. He genuinely didn't know how to answer. No explanation could truly account for the power within him. Before his return, he couldn't reveal anything, especially with a mastermind behind a perjurer, still hidden somewhere unknown. So he simply said, I don't know. The Dean didn't buy it. You don't know. You've used that power yourself. Yet you claim ignorance. Gray replied evenly. That's correct. I don't know. He continued. I wasn't even aware such a power existed within me. It was Professor Ariel who discovered it and explained it to me. Ariel glanced at Gray, unsure what he was plotting. After all, every word he'd just spoken was a lie. When he defeated the Ogre General, he had already been freely wielding that power. Gray shot her a subtle look. The message clear: play along. To stop the perjure, he needed her to keep acting as the one in control of that power. Ariel understood immediately. So that's your plan? Thorough as ever. Truth be told, he didn't act like someone experiencing life for the first time. Could he be one of those reincarnators from novels? She dismissed the thought as absurd. Ariel walked over slowly. Since he trusts me this much, I don't really have a choice. I'll have to step forward for him. She then explained to the Dean. As you said, Gray's power can't be analyzed through magical theory. But with my eyes I can see him clearly. After observing that power, I asked Professor Siscat Longfellow, whose affinity is particularly compatible, to assist him. That's what made today's level of control possible. I'm still researching how to properly guide that power. She paused before asking, so, would you allow me to take full responsibility for everything related to Gray's power? The Dean nodded. After witnessing that battle myself, I can't refuse your request. He then made his decision on the spot. From now on, whether it concerns Gray or the entire God's Eye Special Admission Group, all salvation operations will be under Professor Ariel's command. If the Academy can provide any assistance, don't hesitate to ask. Hearing this, both Gray and Ariel froze for a moment. The Dean was effectively granting Ariel full authority. They exchanged a glance. Unmistakable joy reflected in both their eyes. The Dean continued, now, let's head to the underground special medical ward to examine Diaper. I'll need your eyes. Come with me. And so Ariel left, together with the Dean, in the blink of an eye. 3 hours passed. The moment her investigation concluded, Ariel immediately summoned Gray. According to the analysis, the power used within Diver was almost identical to that of the perjurer. The energy Diver unleashed matched exactly what they had previously observed. In the laboratory, there was no doubt. He had used the same type of crystal, originating from that research facility. Still, Gray couldn't help but wonder, what exactly had Diver gone through? The next thing Ariel said was shocking. In truth, that man had already been dead for a long time. His soul retained nothing but the ability to receive and execute commands. Once that power was activated, Diver lost all control. Everything stemmed from that force. It's possible that, the moment the power was implanted into him, the person known as Diver ceased to exist. As for why he came specifically to challenge you, it's because you were marked. It was retaliation, carried out after Professor Bradley was killed. At that point, a critical question formed in Gray's mind. If Diver had been tampered with only after Varian's death, then that meant a third party was involved. Ariel, sharp as ever, had already reached the same conclusion exactly. There's something much bigger hidden behind this. I'll keep digging into these connections, but it will take time. Her instincts told her that the Academy itself was likely entangled in all of this. The World Union Academy was far more complicated than it appeared. On the surface, Gray said he understood and asked her to let him know if there was anything he could help with. Ariel rested her hand by the window, feeling the lingering warmth of the setting sun. She thanked him softly. Without you, this situation would have ended in absolute defeat. There's one more thing, she added. As for your power, it seems you've learned how to use it without damaging your soul. Gray scratched the back of his head, slightly embarrassed, but the backlash on my body was worse than before. What Ariel said next, however, left him puzzled. She told him not to worry, because the Sword Saint had already advanced his training to the next stage. Joy surged through Gray. Could that really be true? This time, it was entirely thanks to the Sword Saint. Without him, Gray wouldn't have grasped the deeper momentum of that power. Ariel nodded yes. He'll personally guide your cultivation. As long as you train with him, you'll learn to control that power far better than you can now. The very next day, Gray began training with the Sword Saint. This time, countless mannequins stood erected around him. From behind, the Sword Saint called out loudly. Training in a place like this is both dangerous and agonizing. If you're willing to take more time, there are safer options. Are you sure about this? Behind him, several professors were watching closely. By now, they were taking Gray very seriously. Gray nodded, making it clear that only this kind of high-risk training could truly draw out his power. Seeing his resolve, the Sword Saint stopped trying to persuade him. In that case, begin. Gray slowly closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. He recalled the Sword Saint's earlier words. Become the sword, a lone sword. Remember that sensation gradually. That mysterious power surfaced along his blade. And before he realized it, the power had already spread throughout his entire body. At that moment, Gray opened his eyes. The training had begun with a sharp whoosh. He swung his sword, and every mannequin before him shattered instantly. The strike was impossibly fast. Once that power enveloped the blade, even a casual slash was enough to destroy them, completely wherever his figure passed. A light cut was all it took. Mannequins ahead collapsed into fragments. His goal for the day was simple. Destroy everything, and do it within the shortest time possible. The other professors stared in shock. His speed was almost unbelievable. The Sword Saint, however, wore a different expression, far more complicated because he had already identified the core of Gray's problem. Just then, Gray swung his sword toward another mannequin. In the next instant, his body split open again, blood bursting from fresh wounds. Even so, Gray knew he absolutely could not stop, gritting his teeth against the pain. He swung once more after that strike. His body finally collapsed. That was when the professors behind him stepped in, spreading their hands, as healing magic surged forth to restore his body. As the healing magic flowed into him, the blood on Gray's forehead slowly faded away. He looked as though nothing had happened at all, and thanked them. The Sword Saint laughed loudly. Not bad, you lasted a little longer than last time. With enough repetition, your body will eventually learn how to withstand. The backlash. Gray flexed his wrist, finally realizing something he had overlooked while fully focused moments earlier. At the time, he had been in a near berserk state, which was why he barely felt any pain. But the truth was the opposite. Using that power was excruciating. The Sword Saint walked toward him slowly. Pain and torment mean you're pushing past your limits. That said, I know this kind of training is excessive. Whether you continue is still your decision. Ray answered with action over training or not. He had to keep going because he simply didn't have time to spare. He asked the Sword Saint to run it again, determined to force his body to adapt as quickly as possible. Just then, the sharp sound of high heels entered the training ground, cutting them off mid-moment. It was Professor Ariel, and she clearly wasn't pleased. She stated firmly that this training could only be done once per day, for Gray's own sake. Repeating it could cause lasting damage. Gray insisted it was fine. His body had already been healed by other professors, and training this way shouldn't harm his soul. Ariel disagreed. Physical injuries could be healed, but taking another heavy hit before his mind stabilized would be dangerous at that point. It could even affect the way you swing your sword. Gray understood this better than anyone. He'd experienced it firsthand before. That lingering issue was exactly why he had once failed to unleash his full power. The Sword Saint spoke up honestly. This is a relief. Even I can't repeat this kind of training multiple times a day, so listen to Ariel. With a loud crash, he dropped the armor in his hand onto the ground, the sound making its weight unmistakably clear. One of the professors asked in confusion Gray, "Why are you in such a hurry to grow stronger? You're already powerful enough." Ariel quickly stepped in. "That's on me. I dragged Gray into the conflict surrounding Professor Bradley, and now those in the shadows see him as an enemy." The diver incident was only the beginning. Someone is moving within the Academy's shadows, and the criminal group Blood Wipers, who may be after Bradley's magical catalyst, could strike at any time. Even isolating Gray in a heavily guarded area wouldn't guarantee his safety. The only solution is for him to become stronger himself. That's the only path to survival. After hearing that, Gray placed a hand over his chest. He told Ariel not to worry. Stopping Liquid 4 was his own decision, and deep down he knew no matter what, he had to stop it or humanity was finished. Ariel nodded with satisfaction. "You're an outstanding student. All I can do is help you draw out that power to its fullest." The Sword Saint suddenly burst out laughing. "The way you say that, it sounds like you already have a plan." Ariel continued, "Don't tell me. You've forgotten the fastest and safest way for a swordsman to grow stronger." Hearing that, the Sword Saint glanced at Gray, inspecting him from head to toe. Gray stood there watching him with curiosity. The Sword Saint let out a wry smile. For a swordsman, the quickest solution is simple. Change your sword instinctively. Gray looked down at the blade on his waist. It was a standard Academy-issued sword, supposedly a top-tier custom weapon. Ariel explained that while the sword was top-tier, that was only by first-year standards. It simply couldn't withstand Gray's current power. Gray glanced down at the blade in his hand. Sure enough, chips and cracks had already formed. Just as Ariel said, his present strength could easily destroy it. Ariel chuckled, "No need to worry. I'll take you to my vault and let you choose a truly high-grade weapon." The sword saint paused in mild surprise. "You mean you're really going to pick one from there?" Ariel waved it off. "It's fine. Gray has more than earned it." She lifted her hand and sliced through the empty air. In the next instant, a blinding blue light burst forth. Gray stared at Ariel in disbelief as a doorway slowly materialized in midair. Ariel turned back with a smile. "Gray, why are you just standing there? Come in and pick a weapon already." The moment he stepped inside, Gray was stunned speechless. Piles of gold coins filled his vision, along with all kinds of strange blueprints. Wealth that generations could never hope to accumulate in a lifetime. And before long, you'll be choosing a weapon from this very vault. The place was so vast that even Ariel herself momentarily lost track of where the sword section was. Ray stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sight. The sword saint spoke slowly. "What you'll do today is simple. Choose a sword." He told Gray not to hold back and to pick the very best. This chance would come only once. Surrounded by master-crafted weapons, Gray didn't even know where to begin. Ariel laughed softly. "Sometimes having too many choices makes things harder. Ideally, I want you to test every sword here at full power. But given your unique strength, we can only test one per day. So let's shortlist a few." She picked up the sharpest blade inside. "We'll start with this one." The moment Gray held it, he felt something was off. It was far too heavy, severely affecting his speed. Ariel was well aware of that, but its cutting power was exceptional. With a snap of her fingers, a wooden post appeared in front of Gray. Gray swung his sword with a thunderous crash. The post was smashed to pieces. The blade truly lived up to Ariel's description. Gray was stunned. It was the sharpest sword he had ever seen. Still, both Ariel and the sword saint felt it wasn't quite right. For him, its power was undeniable, but in real combat it might prove too unwieldy. No matter how sharp a sword was, missing the target rendered it meaningless. Gray disagreed against massive, cumbersome enemies, divine beasts, or even structures. It could be the perfect weapon. Ariel told him not to rush. She would also give him a magic storage pouch. As long as he carried it with him, the sword wouldn't be a burden. Gray couldn't help asking, "This sword, it's not something you can just give away, is it?" Ariel laughed. "What are you talking about? It's just been gathering dust here. Isn't it better for it to be used by someone who needs it? And when you face the enemies behind Varian, who's really summoning the Purger, can you say for sure you won't regret not having it?" Thinking it through, Gray had to admit she was right. Whether they were here or not changed nothing, even if they trained with everything they had. With that, he accepted the sword and thanked her sincerely. The sword saint stepped over and warned him, "Unless you plan to actually use it, try not to let others see you wield that blade." The remark puzzled Gray. The sword saint explained, "If it were put on the market, it would be worth at least 10 billion, no less than 10,000 gold coins." The number left Gray utterly stunned. He'd never heard of anything so absurd. He never imagined Ariel would give away something so valuable, so casually, and hurried to return it, only for her to refuse outright. No returns, especially not on items someone's already used. Seeing his expression, Ariel burst out laughing. "If I say it's yours, then it's yours. That way you won't hesitate when using it." Gray instinctively thought she had to be joking. But Ariel said seriously, "I never joke. If spending 10 billion can protect the God's Eye, admission slot, I'd do it gladly. This sword is your reward." Faced with such a gift, Gray still hesitated. Ariel raised an eyebrow. "What are you saying? A mere 10 billion isn't worth my effort. Do I really have so little face?" At that, Gray finally accepted the sword with a smile and promised to take good care of it. Only then did a satisfied smile appear on Ariel's face. Besides that, there are plenty of ordinary swords, suitable for regular combat. Come take a look. Gray never expected Ariel's vault to be this astonishing beside him. The sword saint sighed in this world. No one possesses eyes as sharp as God's Eye Ariel. In other words, her eyes could literally make money at will. Ariel turned to the sword saint as a teacher. "Which one do you think is the best?" The sword saint began examining the collection carefully. His gaze soon settled on a sword with a golden hilt. "Gray, try this one. See how it feels." Gray took the sword and inspected it closely. With a sharp whoosh, he swung it once, and the sensation was incredible. The blade felt remarkably light. He followed up with several more swings, the air tearing cleanly with a crisp, satisfying sound. After more than 20 consecutive swings, the sword felt increasingly comfortable in his hands. It was a well-crafted blade, yet something felt off. Was it simply unfamiliarity? The sword saint, having observed everything, spoke up. It doesn't suit you. Try another. He stepped aside. This one was created for experimental purposes. It might be a better match. Tilting his head, he gestured. I think you'll like this one. When Gray saw the blade, he froze for a full 2 seconds. It was clearly special, drawing him in immediately. The moment the sword saint introduced it, Gray stopped cold. This sword was anything but ordinary. The sword saint told him to pick it up and feel it out. The instant Gray grasped it, his eyes widened. It was far lighter than expected, and he quickly noticed something else. The blade wasn't sharpened at all. The sword saint explained. This sword was designed to test new technology. Not for combat. It's an unsharpened block of steel, but incredibly durable. Gray, this one might truly suit you. Gray asked, so you're saying, with my current power, I don't actually need a sharpened blade? The sword saint nodded. Exactly. I doubt any blade, no matter how strong, can truly contain your power. The sword saint studied Gray. If you continue to grow stronger, then every sword here may eventually become a hindrance, rather than a tool in that case. Wouldn't it be better to imagine a future where you no longer rely on a blade's edge to fight? After a moment, Gray slowly handed the sword back in. The next instant, the sword saint struck once, cleaving the iron post apart effortlessly. Was this the true level of the sword saint? But that wasn't the end of it. Moments later, the shattered metal began to change, melting into a cement-like slurry. Gray was completely stunned. This wasn't just cutting through steel. It was total destruction. Ariel sighed. You're just showing off, aren't you? Personally, I think Gray should keep using a sword still. Testing it won't hurt, she then asked. Anything else you want to try? If you're interested in weapons beyond swords, I can show you other sections. Gray glanced around and shook his head. I'll pass. There's simply too many weapons here. Testing them one by one would waste too much training time. He decided to test a few more before leaving. His eyes fell on a red blade, lighter than the first and seemingly sturdier. Gray started toward it. Suddenly, he stopped. His gaze shifted elsewhere. He sensed something unusual. Looking up, he saw a slender white sword, long and narrow. What unsettled him was the strange familiarity. It felt like he'd seen it before. He asked Ariel, do you know anything about this sword? Ariel thought for a moment. It was left behind by a former student after graduation. Not a legendary blade, but very well made. That answer only made Gray more eager to test it himself. Ray reached out, and the moment his hand closed around the hilt, the sensation was incredibly comfortable, as if the sword fit his palm perfectly. He walked over to a wooden post and gave the blade a light shake. In the next instant, he swung down hard, slicing the post cleanly in half. The result caught even Ariel and the sword saint. Off guard, Gray himself was overjoyed. He hadn't expected the sword to match him so well. It felt as though he had been training with this blade since the moment he was born. The familiarity etched deep into his instincts. Ariel burst into laughter as she walked over. Looks like you really like that sword, Gray. Gray nodded, clearly pleased. Staring at the blade, he spoke softly, the excitement impossible to hide. It was the best fitting sword he had ever used in his life. And Ariel waved a hand, then keep going. Let's see whether it truly matches your power. That made Gray hesitate. Wasn't this sword left behind by one of your students? What if I break it? Ariel shook her head. Don't worry, compared to collecting dust on a shelf, I'm sure this sword would rather be used by you. Thinking it over, Gray had to agree. No sword wanted to be forgotten in a vault forever. He then asked who was the alumnus who forged this sword. Ariel answered his name was Metallum. The moment he heard that name, Gray froze. Of course he knew it. The greatest magic sword master in history. Metallum Nora Lamb hailed as the prodigy who broke blades. He never imagined the sword was his work. After that, they left the vault. For today, they would test only this one sword. Ariel smiled to test its strength and durability. I want you to push this sword to its limits. She handed the blade back to Gray, and seeing her relaxed expression, a subtle ripple stirred in his heart. Before he struck, Ariel added, we'll start with the most unusual sword, and see how your power affects it. Gray stepped up to the wooden post. Once more he slowly closed his eyes, drawing out that mysterious power within him. The familiar red energy surfaced across his body, now something he could summon with ease. But the moment he opened his eyes, his gathered momentum scattered. Gray frowned. This was the first time something like this had happened. He glanced down at the sword. "Give me a second, I'll try again." Once more he condensed his power, wrapping it around the blade. In his mind, he repeated the same thought. "I am the sword, let my power merge with it." Yet the same thing happened again. The energy was dispersed by the sword itself. Confusion set in. Why couldn't his power cling to the blade at all? Sensing something wrong, Ariel stepped forward. "Gray, do you feel anything unusual in your body?" But he felt nothing out of the ordinary. Ariel pondered briefly. "If that's the case, then the issue lies with the sword. Let's set it aside and test another one." She reassured him gently. "Maybe it just doesn't resonate with your unique power, so don't be discouraged." Ariel took out the storage pouch at her waist. "If that's the case, let's test the most ordinary sword this time." Her gaze sharpened as she slowly drew a blade from her hand. "Try this one, I'm certain it'll surprise you." The moment Gray accepted Ariel's sword, he prepared himself, repeating silently that he was a lone blade, determined to merge completely with the weapon. Gradually, that mysterious power surfaced along the sword. In the next instant, red energy wrapped around his entire body, and this time it didn't disperse. Gray chuckled. "So it worked. Looks like the problem really was the sword from before." Just then, his eyes narrowed as a sudden voice echoed in his mind. "While there's still time." The unexpected words froze him in place. He turned to Ariel and the Sword Saint, but neither reacted. Only he had heard it. The mysterious voice spoke again, though its meaning remained completely unclear to him. From behind, the Sword Saint concluded that having the sword contain and carry Gray's power was no longer an issue. Gray then charged alone into the puppet formation. In the next instant, his figure vanished from where he stood. With a sharp slash, his blade sheared through the armored target ahead. Examining the output, Gray found the power similar to before, but the motion was far smoother. Another strike fell, cleaving through the armor. Again, the fluidity made every swing effortless. His body felt unbelievably light. With a single leap, he crossed a vast distance. Bang, bang, bang. Moving and striking in one flow, Gray cut down dozens of armored puppets in moments, his sword aura behaving like an automatic scan. Every piece of armor touched by that aura was severed. Instantly, the sight stunned every professor present. This speed was on a completely different level from before. From afar, Gray's body could no longer be seen. Only intersecting streaks of red sword light remained. It felt as though he were flying, complete freedom pushing his state to its peak. With a heavy clang, another slash took an armored head clean off. His gaze sharpened as he prepared to push further, to test his absolute speed limit. But the next second he froze. Every wooden post ahead had already been destroyed. That surprised him. The objective was complete. Yet time felt unnaturally short. He scanned the area. The number of targets matched before, but his speed had more than doubled. In the same time frame, he would have cleared only half before. Now he had wiped them all out. Watching from afar, Ariel fell into deep thought. She called out to Gray, but received no response. That unsettled everyone. Why was he still standing there, unresponsive, realizing something was wrong? Ariel shouted toward him, "Gray, can you hear me?" At the same instant, her words fell. The sword slipped from Gray's hand and hit the ground. He suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, his body bending forward uncontrollably. Seeing this, all the professors cast healing magic at once, determined to keep Gray safe. A powerful restorative force wrapped around him, allowing him to stand again. Even so, his body was completely drained. The situation confused him. It hadn't been as severe as last time, so why couldn't he exert any strength? The Sword Saint told him not to push himself, and to return with him first. Ariel assessed the situation. Even with healing magic, excessive blood loss will drain your stamina. You need rest. The Sword Saint commented that Gray had broken through a limit that shouldn't have been possible. A good sign, but not one to force further. Ariel then crouched down to pick up the long sword, warning that acting without a dedicated healer was extremely dangerous in real combat. She gently swung the blade and activated God's Eye, carefully examining its condition. Ariel was astonished to find that, even after such intense testing, the blade didn't bear a single scratch. This was truly a rare weapon. Whoever the student was who left this sword behind, they were clearly no ordinary individual. What troubled her more was the blade's glow. It seemed brighter than before. Was it just her imagination, or was this a weapon capable of growth? Ariel examined the light, reflecting off the blade more closely, and the longer she looked, the more something felt wrong. In the next instant, she spun around sharply, her gaze locking onto the distance she had sensed. Killing intent, Gray asked in confusion, Professor. What is it at the same time? A tendre explosion érupted from the direction of the teaching buildings. The shock wave roared past, whipping Ariel's hair violently into the air. Gray and the Sword Saint were both stunned by the sight. What on earth was happening? Another deafening boom followed, as chunks of debris crashed down in front of them. Looking up, they saw that the front of the World United Academy was already engulfed in smoke and flames. Students were fleeing in panic, terror written all over their faces. Some instructors had already activated barrier spells, prioritizing the protection of nearby students. The scene left Gray momentarily stunned. It had all happened far too suddenly. The Sword Saint spoke slowly. That area houses the Academy's hazardous materials vault. Soon Gray noticed an eerie red flame raging within the wreckage. This explosion was clearly deliberate. As the metal structure shattered, the Sword Saint caught sight of traces, resembling teleportation magic. Are they actually daring to raid the Academy's headquarters? One of the professors immediately objected. The treasury walls were protected by powerful anti-teleportation wards, capable of resisting most explosive spells. Only Ariel grasped the true nature of the situation. She detected the energy of the purger, mixed into the smoke, and hearing that made Gray's heart sink. With a grave expression, Ariel explained that the attackers had likely used special crystals, produced in the underground laboratories, to break through the outer walls and the anti-teleportation field. At that moment, Gray could no longer stay calm. The ones behind this explosion were clearly Varian's allies. They had truly dared to strike the Academy itself. Below, students continued to flee in chaos, while some were killed outright by the aftershocks. The crisis of the World United Academy had arrived.